Story 1.
Exposing my wife's cheating, a DNA test on our kids uncovered her decade-long affair and lies. I'm Grant Oster. While pursuing my MC degree in chemistry in graduate school, I crossed paths with Laura. I fell in love instantly. It took her about 6 months, just before earning her MA in art history, to reciprocate. But it happened. Although neither of us was particularly experienced, as far as I was concerned, our bed life was excellent, and she never voiced any complaints. We married less than a year after her MA graduation, securing jobs in the same city. She taught at a community college, while I taught part-time at a state university and worked part-time with a science consulting firm. After 3 years of marriage, I left the university and worked full-time as a consultant specializing in explosives. One of my clients was the federal government, and during the birth of our first daughter, Angela, my government work involved extensive travel. I understand it was tough on Laura, but I did propose quitting for a full-time teaching job at a local college, which had tried to recruit me multiple times. However, Laura appreciated my job's financial benefits and the lifestyle it afforded us, encouraging me to persist. Her smiling mantra was, "I can survive, I'm self-sufficient." Even with the birth of our second daughter, Grace, 2 years after Angela, my travel persisted. I again suggested a career change, but Laura insisted I stick with consulting, considering the additional responsibilities of raising 2 children. When our daughters turned 5 and 7, my schedule eased, leading Laura to return to work. She secured an administrative position at the local university, primarily affiliated with the liberal arts college. For reasons I never fully understood but didn't bother me, as it brought her joy. Laura developed a keen interest in photography. We now have over a dozen albums chronicling our lives with the kids. During that time, Laura developed an unexpected interest in other languages, particularly Italian. She occasionally traveled for her job, notably to Chicago, where she attended meetings with benefactors, visiting professors, and the Art Institute. Additionally, she visited Gina, a college friend who had been an Italian exchange student and was now working in Chicago. When our children were 8 and 10, global terrorist activities made my skill set highly valuable to the federal government. I was recruited to work full-time for a 2-year period involving extensive travel. Before accepting the assignment, I discussed it with Laura at length, as it would require more travel for that period, possibly longer, with occasional absences lasting more than a month. Laura encouraged me to accept, expressing that she and the girls would miss me but would manage fine. Unfortunately, my government assignment meant I was away for 2 consecutive Christmases when Grace was 9 and 10, Angela 11 and 12, which was heart-wrenching. Laura took the girls to visit Gina in Chicago during this time. I maintained daily phone contact with them throughout their week-long visit, and they appeared content. Gina's relatives, including kids around our daughter's ages, were also present. Shortly before Thanksgiving, after over 2 years providing expertise to combat terrorism, I returned to full-time consulting with minimal travel. Laura continued occasional travel, usually out once a month for 2 or 3 days, mostly to Chicago. I gladly assumed all parental duties for Grace and Angela when she was away, although sometimes they accompanied her. It's expected that girls may grow closer to their mother, and although I had a good relationship with Grace and Angela, they rarely confided in me or sought my opinion on personal matters. Contrary to their openness with Laura, it didn't bother me much, except for one thing: they never shared their experiences or were as talkative about their trips with their mother to Chicago. While not withdrawn, they never voluntarily provided information and often playfully changed the subject. Just before 18-year-old Grace went to an out-of-state college and Angela was a junior at another out-of-state college, Laura experienced a dark period. Upon discovering her tears on multiple occasions, I inquired about the cause. She attributed it to becoming an empty nester and suggested a shopping trip to Chicago with the girls. The trip was hastily planned and apparently required several long phone conversations with Gina in Italian. Since I didn't understand Italian, I accepted Laura's account of the details without doubt, despite her being unusually emotional in the days leading up to their departure. Laura returned from Chicago after an additional 3 days, showing a more positive outlook, though not entirely back to normal. However, what truly surprised me was the limited number of purchases they brought back from their shopping trip. Upon inquiry, I learned that some items would be shipped later, including those sent directly to the girls' college addresses. I did observe a positive change in my bed life, which was never problematic except during my prolonged absences when I remained faithful to Laura. The improvement coincided with Grace leaving for school. I attributed this positive shift to Laura and me growing closer as empty nesters, relishing the heightened lovemaking. Then the pivotal event in my story unfolded. I took an unplanned break from work around noon on a Thursday without informing Laura, who was at her usual workplace. Originally intending to play 9 holes of golf, my plans were thwarted by rain. Nevertheless, I was preparing for our upcoming anniversary and wanted to surprise Laura with a party. To execute this plan, I consulted with an event planner. Around p.m., a delivery man arrived with a wooden crate marked fragile. Using a dolly, he brought it up the 4 front stairs to our house. The crate was addressed to Laura, and after signing for it, we positioned it in the living room with the "This Side Up" label properly displayed. The delivery of the crate struck me as unusual, and I couldn't fathom its contents. Examining the return address, which read Romano Photography Studios, along with an address in Chicago's Center City, I called Laura at work to inform her about the delivery. Initially quiet, she mentioned it was work-related and supposed to be sent to her office, with a plan to have someone assist in bringing it to the office the next day. While this explanation seemed rational, 3 factors raised suspicions. 1. The prolonged silence on the phone, unusual for the talkative Laura. 2. Her commanding tone when instructing not to open it, coupled with a stressed voice. And 3. Her overall uptight demeanor. Intrigued, I took photos of the crate and entered the return address information into my laptop. Upon Laura's return from work, she hurriedly inspected the crate, appearing suspicious of tampering. When I asked about its contents, she became vague and standoffish. Sensing something amiss, I offered to help open it, not only to be helpful but also to gauge her reaction. However, she insisted on inspecting it at work for potential damage and a possible insurance claim. The next morning, before I left for work, 2 maintenance personnel from her college carefully moved the crate to a school van under Laura's supervision. When I shared my enthusiasm about the school exhibition, I was really trying to gauge Laura's response. She avoided eye contact and hesitated, mentioning uncertainly that she wasn't sure if that was the purpose, but assured me that she would let me know if they decided on an exhibition. The fact that she stuttered twice within 14 hours discussing the same topic, something unusual for the usually eloquent Laura, only fueled my curiosity even more. If that didn't pique my interest, I wasn't sure what would. The 5th aspect that unsettled me and raised suspicions was Laura's subsequent silence about the mysterious crate. Over the following 2 weeks since the arrival of the enigmatic package, I gathered most publicly available information about Romano Photography Studios. This entity served as the U.S. business front for the globally renowned photographer Piero Romano, someone I might have vaguely heard of previously. Surprisingly, Laura, despite frequently discussing artists and photographers in connection with her photography hobby and university work, had never mentioned him. Piero Romano had a distinctive style, with most of his photos featuring both genuine photographic realism and various effects. He excelled in traditional photographic techniques like bokeh, blur, panning, rule of thirds, and long exposure, often combining multiple effects in a single photo. Additionally, he was the sole practitioner of a unique effect named after him, Romano abilità artistica, loosely translating to Romano's artistry. While challenging to describe in words, my attempt would be that it renders some features super realistic while adjacent ones appear fuzzy, with changes in color or shade within the same object. However, this description falls short of capturing its true essence. While much of the information about Piero was intellectually and artistically intriguing, 2 astonishing facts stood out. The person overseeing administration at his studio was his niece, Gina Romano Biani, a friend of Laura's whom I had met only once and never in Chicago, known to me by her married name, Gina Biani. Additionally, Piero had died in a car crash on September 1 of the preceding year, and his memorial service in Chicago, before his body was sent to his ancestral burial plot in Italy, took place on September 6. The timing seemed highly coincidental. Laura becoming emotional around September 2nd, supposedly about becoming an empty nester, and her and the girls' shopping trip to Chicago from September 5 through 8. Though not a rocket scientist, I hold a master's in chemistry from one of the top 10 schools in the country, allowing me to piece it together. Despite the crushing realization, the only plausible explanation was that Laura had been involved in a genuine love affair with Piero Romano for at least 10 years, and my daughters were aware of it. Another intriguing detail emerged: a Chicago exhibition of Piero's most famous and stimulating works, including those owned by private collectors and some never seen publicly before, was scheduled for April 16th. 3 weeks away from when I discovered this information. I was confident that Laura would have a business trip to Chicago around that time, despite the 18th being my birthday, and the exhibition likely featuring the photographs from the crate delivered to our house 2 weeks earlier. I have never felt more driven in my life to devise a plan for addressing my unfaithful wife and disloyal daughters. Due to my initial rage, which I needed to suppress to execute my intentions, I had to arrange a business trip for the night I discovered the incriminating information and 2 nights thereafter. I left a heartfelt message on Laura's work phone, apologizing profusely and promising to make it up to her, before packing what I needed for a 3-night stay in a local hotel. Part 1 of my plan involved preparing all the necessary divorce papers to serve and file once I obtained the expected proof. Part 2 aimed to find a way to have someone visit and film the Chicago exhibition on its opening day, the 16th, which was by invitation only. Part 3 focused on organizing my affairs to secure as many material possessions and funds as possible. My sentiments toward Laura were indifferent, and I was very close to feeling the same about Grace and Angela. Part 4 was about ultimate revenge. Even after the divorce conclusion, Part 1 was no. Problemi got a recommendation for a good divorce attorney, Gail Schiff. She advised me on everything I needed to do, and despite her recommendation for irreconcilable differences as grounds, she was willing to proceed with long-standing infidelity. Gail just needed a modicum of proof before she could file the papers, which I expected to have for her on the morning of the 17th. She could arrange for service on Laura by a law enforcement agent other than the county sheriff, along with a private process server to record events on the last night of the exhibition on the 18th. For Part 2, I gathered as much information as I could about art appraisers with any relation to Chicago. I found a young appraiser named Roberto Milan trying to build his business. I went to see him in Chicago, talked with him for almost a full day. Roberto was familiar with Piero's work, certain he could get an invitation to the opening on the 16th, not averse to filming the photos I thought would interest me using a small, expensive, easily hidden HD camera I gave him. He conveyed his belief that he could provide a thorough and high appraisal of the photos. I anticipated his final words. Expressing the desire for a challenge to establish himself as a legitimate player in the art appraisal world convinced me to hire Roberto. For a segment of Parts 3 and 4, I cashed in 2 bearer bonds from our safe deposit box, totaling about $25,000. I couldn't remember if Laura knew about them, and she certainly wouldn't now. They were now worth together about $25,000. For another segment of Part 3, I provided my attorney with a complete list of all our assets, including an appraisal of our house. I took photographs of all Laura's jewelry and all contents of our safe deposit box, minus the bearer bonds, and provided my attorney with updated bank statements, credit card numbers, and outstanding purchases, retirement plans, and brokerage accounts. As a small segment of Part 4, on the last day of my supposed absence, I sneaked into the house while Laura was at work. I took a magic marker and erased my face from every photograph in the dozen or so albums she had compiled over the years. Having never examined them in their entirety before, I was surprised to find that I appeared in no more than of the photos. I also discovered 2 previously unseen photos that, even if I had come across them before, I would likely have considered innocent. They featured Laura, Gina, Grace, Angela, and notably Piero. I made high-quality scans and photocopies of these photos before returning them to the album, marked with a black marker across them, an arrow pointing to Piero, and a legend declaring him the love of Laura's life. 2 days after my return from the business trip, Laura informed me that she had to go to Chicago from the morning of the CH to the afternoon of the TH, expressing disappointment about not spending my birthday together. I suggested accompanying her, and she smoothly demurred, stating it was all business. She promised to take me to a resort the following weekend, asserting she would make it up to me in a way I hadn't ever experienced before, following that statement with a kiss. At that point in time, I regarded her as a $3 fancy woman, so I just enjoyed myself. She gagged a little and obviously wasn't pleased, but pretended that she was, asserting it was only a sample of what's to come, darling. For all of Parts 1, 3, and 4 of my plan, there was a particularly risky aspect, however, the rest, especially after getting comfortable with and hiring the art appraiser. I was quite confident would fall into place. The risky part involved talking to Grace, deciding that I needed a face-to-face with her, as soon as I dropped Laura off at the airport on the morning of the 15th. I drove the approximately 180 miles from Columbus to Carnegie Mellon University in Pittsburgh, where Grace was studying chemical engineering. Why Grace and not Angela? While both girls took after their mother more than me, Grace was by far more like me, at least in terms of how her brain worked, than Angela. Neither Angela nor Laura could ever conceive of a course of study in chemical engineering, closely related to my degrees in chemistry. Also, Grace had a harder time lying than either Angela or Laura, and although her failure to advise me of Laura's love affair with Piero suggested otherwise, maybe not, she seemed more concerned with a nuclear family than Angela was. I called ahead to Grace's cell phone when I was about halfway there, and she actually seemed excited to meet. I told her I'd take her to a late lunch at a real restaurant. We met at the eatery of her choosing, about a mile from campus, and got a secluded booth. After our meal, I informed Grace that there was a very serious matter I needed to discuss with her, and she displayed a perplexed expression. Before continuing, I asked for her assurance not to disclose our conversation to anyone, including her mom and Angela, until the day after my birthday. I made a request for her promise, raising my hand in the I swear position. She seemed surprised and commented, "Wow, sounds serious." "Okay, Dad, I promise. I swear," she assured, lifting her hand and attempting to force a smile. I then revealed, "I learned about your mother's involvement with Piero Romano, and am contemplating the possibility of a divorce." "Oh no, Daddy," she exclaimed, covering her mouth with her hand, tears welling up instantly. I continued, "There's only one hope. I need to gather all the information you have about it, and I need you to undergo a DNA test." "What?" she exclaimed, nearly on the verge of a meltdown. Observing that the restaurant wasn't the appropriate setting, I instructed her to meet me outside, and afterward, head to my car. Once I settled the bill, I located the waitress, paid in cash with a tip, and discovered Grace, still in tears on the sidewalk. Once in my car, I felt the need to get to the bottom of things. I told Grace that the survival of our family depended on her opening up. After a brief period of crying where she struggled to express herself, and with me merely gazing at her, she began to share. She revealed that she didn't realize Mom was involved with Uncle Piero, as we were told to call him until she was 12, despite displays of affection every time we were in Chicago, especially at Christmas. Grace became aware of this through remarks Angela made. Angela knew before she did, but Grace lacked the sophistication to understand. When she confronted Mom explained it as an adult matter. She explained that she was in love with 2 men and insisted that I would understand when I grew up. Mom emphasized that I must never know about it because it could mean the end of our family, as I was deemed too insensitive, that's the word she used, to comprehend such complexities. Consequently, I was sworn to secrecy. Grace broke down again for a while and then continued to recount her experiences. She shared that she had hoped Piero's funeral would mark the end of it all and that I would never find out. However, after Mom made a scene at Piero's casket, Grace confronted her once more. She told Mom that if she jumped into someone else's arms, she would reveal the entire story to me. Mom rebuked Grace, questioning how she could think of her as a mother, claimed to have loved Piero and me, asserting that there would be no one else. She simply needed to honor Piero's memory. Grace believed her and prayed that the day when I found out would never come, confident that Mom would not engage in another love or even a close-enough affair. Update, I gleaned additional details from her, until I sensed it would be counterproductive to press further. She remained in anguish, just as I had anticipated. When I revealed the second purpose of my visit, I expressed my hope to reconcile with Grace's mother based on the information she had shared. However, I needed one more thing for clarity, asked both of us to submit DNA samples to determine if she was my biological daughter. Grace cried, objecting, insisting that I was her only father. "I know that I'm your father," I reassured her, "but I have to know whether I'm your biological one too." Despite her protests, she eventually agreed. I presented her with the letter in the envelope addressed to the lab and sealed it. The instructions were to mail the results to both Grace directly and to me. As I drove her back to campus, she observed as I dropped the envelope into an express mail mailbox. When we hugged goodbye, she pleaded with me to forgive Mom and make it work. I explained that I couldn't promise that at the moment, as I don't lie like she does. However, I acknowledged that Grace had done her part to increase the chances that it would work. I reminded her not to tell anyone about our talk until the 19th at the earliest. She assured me with a smile, and then hesitated, mentioning one more thing. She explained that Mom and Angela would be attending a Chicago exhibition of Piero's works, some of which featured photographs of Mom, on my birthday. She conveyed Mom's apology for the unfortunate timing, but clarified that Mom had to attend, as works inherited from Piero under his will would be displayed. Mom wanted Grace to join as well, but she had too much schoolwork. I smiled and casually responded, "I know. Thanks for being honest." After another hug, she left. Unseen by her, I shed tears, realizing that my relationship with Angela was now as dead as the one with Laura. I hadn't yet decided if I could salvage it with Grace. Grace remained unaware that I had recorded our conversation in the car. There was one thing that Grace didn't know that would cause her pain, and was a segment of part 4 of my plan. The swabs that I put into the envelope that was supposedly mine belonged to an Italian background janitor who worked in my office building, someone I had been friendly with over the years. I promised to pay to have his ancestry determined as a birthday present to him. He didn't even ask why I needed 3 swabs instead of 1 to do that. The one I did send in for testing showed his heritage was more than 80% Italian, with some Eastern and Western European small contributions, which made him happy. Why did I put an Italian's DNA in what was to be tested instead of mine? Because I wanted everyone to hurt. The reason I used an Italian is that during DNA testing they can find out the heritage of both contributors, even if comparing 2 sets, and since Piero was Italian, I wanted everyone to conclude that he was the father of Grace, and if I could work it out, Angela. I crossed my fingers, hoping Grace wouldn't spill the beans. I spoke to her on the phone on the TH, and she assured me she hadn't, and since I hadn't heard from Laura, I was sure that was true. Around p.m. on the TH, Roberto Milan emailed photos of the relevant parts of the Romano exhibit to me. They hurt me deeper than I thought they would. I shook like a leaf as I sobbed while viewing them. There was a series of 10 photos, increasing in size from the first to the last, all with distinctive characteristics, including the last 2 brilliant Romano Abilita Artistica effects. The series was entitled Natale Amore, Christmas Love. What initially broke me were the first 2 in the series, which showed 2 girls in the background of a photo of a woman who was unquestionably Laura. While there was blurring of the girls' faces, there was no doubt from their hair, what they were wearing, Christmas gifts from my mother, and relative sizes that it was Angela and Grace when they were around 9 and 11. In the second photo of the first 2, one of Laura's body was exposed, and she had what could only be described as a duck me look. The next 3 in the series showed Laura in increasingly less dress, until in the final one she was, well, you can imagine. The second series started again with a photo where the girls were in the background, this time somewhat older, with the last 4 progressively risque until the second to last, which had Laura in an exceptionally suggestive pose, and the last one, where the clear implication was that she had just been ducked and was in bliss. After I threw up, drank some ginger ale, and had a good cry, I looked at the photos again. If they didn't break my heart, I'd have to say that the last 2 photos were probably the best of their type I had ever seen. I read the text accompanying Roberto Milan's report. Sorry, I know that this will be hard on you. The collection is worth a minimum of $300,000, more likely $500,000. The second to last photo alone would bring $125,000 to $175,000 if sold separately. The last 2 photos are the best execution of Romano Abilita Artistica effects in history, not just in my opinion, but in that of at least 4 other appraisers and art critics that I overheard talking about them. I asked Gina if any were for sale. She put me in touch with the owner, per Piero's will. Not surprisingly, Laura said they weren't for sale at the present time because they were priceless, and the 4 where she was completely in the nude would not be sold until after her passing. I wouldn't want the general public, and especially my husband, seeing me like that while I'm alive, she said, especially my husband, with a laugh. Update: I sent the digital recording of Grace's words, along with Roberto's photos and words, via email to my attorney, Gail. She contacted me at 7:30 on the morning of the 17th. I conveyed that my petition for divorce was clearly justified, citing infidelity. I informed her that a law enforcement officer would serve Laura the following night at the gala. I added, "There's one thing I need to add," and mentioned that I would drop it off so she could include it when expressing it to the process server along with the divorce papers. I handed an envelope addressed to Angela to Gail. It contained a letter from me, a swab from the Italian janitor's cheek, a container with a new swab, and an envelope with express mail postage addressed to a DNA lab, accompanied by instructions. The letter to Angela conveyed the message that if there was any hope for a future relationship between us, she needed to swab the inside of her cheek. Place it in the envelope addressed to the DNA lab with my swab already in it, and send it via express mail. The lab had instructions to mail the results directly to her at school and to me. I emphasized that even if she didn't desire a future relationship, she still needed to comply. If she didn't, I made it clear that I would ensure our finances were tied up for years, leading her to say goodbye to tuition, room and board, and expenses for the end of her junior year and her senior year at the expensive private college she attended. I pointed out that even if her feelings towards me matched her past actions and inactions, it was in her self-interest to do as I asked. I mentioned that Grace had already complied. The letter was signed, "Your father, Grant Oster." I was glad that I wasn't there when the reality hit the fan in Chicago on my birthday. The process server reported to Gail that Laura and Angela were all smiles as they hobnobbed with the public at about 9 p.m. on the 18th. They were perplexed when they were handed the envelopes by the law enforcement officer, as the process server with him took photos. They opened up the envelopes on the spot. The law enforcement officer left, but the process server stayed behind, taking more photos until he was kicked out. The photos he emailed to Gail and Gail to me showed Laura sinking lower and lower onto the ground, ultimately landing in a fetal position, and Angela, first distraught, then angry, and then trying to tend to her prone mother. Angela called me the morning of the 19th. After expressing her disgust with the way I handled serving the papers, I responded strongly, using language I had never used with her before, expressing that it was tough, and she should tell it to someone who cares. Following this, she stated that she wasn't inclined to do the DNA test. In a sarcastic tone, I questioned whether she didn't want to find out who her biological father is, as opposed to the one who has been supporting her all these years. She replied, affirming that I am her father. In response, I expressed uncertainty, stating that maybe I am, maybe not. However, I emphasized that one thing is certain: I've already instructed my attorney to freeze all of her mother's and my accounts. I assured her that there would be no money for her education or living expenses since she's 20 years old in the future unless she mails that envelope with her cheek swab. Now that I think of it, I mentioned to her, I would need a video of you swabbing your cheek, putting it in the envelope, and mailing it all at the same time in order to believe you. This was due to the lies she had told me over the years. I emphasized that I hadn't lied to her. She retorted, pointing out that I hadn't told the whole truth, as my sister would have her tuition paid. I expressed my displeasure, stating that she seemed to be as unpleasant as her mother, and I had no intention of wasting time discussing it further because it disgusted me. I gave her an ultimatum: either do as I say and email me the video, or this would be the last conversation we ever had in her life. After that, I forcefully hung up the phone. It's satisfying to have a landline where slamming the phone down makes a statement, unlike a cell phone, where pushing the red button provides no emphasis. Laura did not attempt to call me from the TH to the Saint she likely delayed her return to Columbus for 2 days, consoling herself with her close friend Gina. The excitement at the exhibition on the 18th made its way into 2 local Chicago papers, complete with a photo of Laura, seemingly provided by the process server. Amid the urge to expel my stomach content, I found some amusement. It was apparent that Laura had visited the house, which I no longer considered a home, on the 22nd. I deduced this as the envelope I had left on the new front door, reinforced with steel and a changed lock similar to the side and rear doors, had vanished. My attorney's message on my cell phone indicated the need for a discussion. The envelope was addressed to "vile fucking slut," an assumption I believed Laura would recognize. My brief message inside conveyed, "Hey, contact your attorney regarding the retrieval of your personal belongings. The sooner we sell the house and conclude our sham of a marriage, the better. I'll resist any attempt by you to return to this house until it is sold. Consider doing something decent for once in our farcical relationship, and don't resist it, even though economic reasons seem to be your sole motivation, given your lack of love or respect for me. Your formerly clueless ex, Grant P.S. The doors are booby-trapped. Any unauthorized entry will start all of your previous family albums on fire." It required a court appearance by the attorneys for something to be worked out with respect to living arrangements. I probably could have gotten exactly what I wanted if I hadn't put that P.S. on the note to the slut, but I couldn't help myself. We finally, through our attorneys, agreed to both vacate the house and immediately put it on the market, with the amount of our temporary housing expenses considered in the division of assets. Laura tried to be difficult in the monetary negotiations, but she had no bargaining power because she acquired her precious photographs from Piero while we were still married. When I demanded 5 photographs, she could choose 1, then me, etc., until all 10 were divvied up. According to her attorney, she got hysterical, especially since by that time she had seen how I had doctored the family photo albums. At Laura's insistence, we took Roberto's appraisal of the photographs, one done by an appraiser hired by her and one by a neutral appraiser. Hilariously, Roberto's was the lowest one, costing her more than if she had accepted his appraisal. Since this was seriously cutting into what she would end up with, she offered me 2 of the photographs that she chose. However, she rescinded that offer when I had my attorney tell hers that I agreed, as long as she had them delivered to the local firing range and watched what I did to them. When all was said and done, by the time the divorce proceedings had concluded, Laura was left with her personal possessions, half the furniture, and 1/4 of the sale price of the house. Nothing else, including no alimony but a suspended jail sentence. More about that later. We did agree to jointly pay all of the college expenses of Grace and Angela until they graduated, but nothing more than that. As for Angela and Grace, as expected, the DNA results came back that they were not my biological daughters. That infuriated Laura so much that she almost had a stroke. I talked to Grace about it, not Angela, who had complied with my request solely to get her college expenses paid and apparently was happy with no future relationship with me. My daughter conveyed that her mother claimed the DNA test results were incorrect. According to her, Mom asserted that during her marriage to me, she never had any close relations with anyone other than me and Piero. Additionally, she insisted that she never even met Piero before our daughter was born. I responded by questioning why, if that were the case, our daughter's father had Italian ancestry like Piero, while my family lineage is entirely Dutch on both sides. I expressed my skepticism, highlighting that her mother had proven to be a pathological liar throughout our more than 24-year relationship, deceiving me about her love for me. Despite all this, she mentioned that her mother desired another DNA test. I explained to my children that the DNA test wasn't going to happen since they were not minors and it was unrelated to the divorce. I clarified that I merely wanted to know the truth in my mind, and I wanted both of them to be aware of it. I reminded them that they witnessed me swabbing my cheek, putting the swab in the envelope, and then mailing it. In response to my daughter's request, I mentioned that her mother's desire for a face-to-face conversation wasn't something I would entertain. I informed them that I instructed my attorney to ignore her repeated requests. I questioned why I would have any reason to engage in a conversation with her. My daughter pleaded with me not to use derogatory terms for her mother and expressed her continued love for her, despite her faults. She asked me, as a favor, to talk with her for an hour. I conveyed to Grace that I couldn't comply with her request. While I had forgiven her and desired to maintain a relationship with her, I made it clear that there was nothing, absolutely nothing, that would lead me to engage in a conversation with her mother. Update now for Laura's suspended jail sentence and getting only 1/4 of the proceeds of the sale of the house. After my phone conversation with Grace about the DNA test and Laura's desire for a talk with me, she did something stupid. I thought that she might pull something, so I hooked up and walked around with a panic button connected directly to a private security company. One night, a woman knocked on the door of the condo that I was renting during the divorce proceedings until the final financial details were worked out. I didn't see the two big guys and Laura standing out to the side when I looked through the peephole. As soon as I opened the door, the two big guys burst in and grabbed Maybute, not before I pushed my silent panic button. After being forcefully seized, they pulled me to a chair and secured me to it, while Laura came in and the other woman departed. Laura expressed regret for resorting to such measures, attributing it to my refusal to meet with her and redo the DNA test, which she insisted was incorrect. Following this, she initiated a conversation with some upbeat remarks, claiming she always loved me and asserting that her affection extended to Piero as well. She contended that her heart was expansive enough to encompass love for both of us. She realized that we were past the point of reconciliation but just wanted to get things off her chest. As she was talking to me, she was holding a swab up. Obviously, she was going to force a DNA sample from me. It really irritated her that I made no verbal response whatsoever to anything that she said. I refused to even acknowledge her presence, trying my best to avoid all eye contact. Fortunately, as she was about to have her two goons pry my mouth open for a DNA swab, there was a response to my panic button. The security company had called the police, and 3 cops with weapons drawn barged into the house. They found me tied up, and one of the miscreants had illegal items in his pants pocket. I explained the situation. The cops ignored Laura's plea to simply let them go, claiming they meant no harm, and they arrested the 3 of them. The little kidnapping event didn't play well with the judge in our divorce proceedings, after she let it be known that if she had to rule, it would be really bad for Laura. I got the division of assets and other considerations set forth above. The criminal court took pity on Laura since it was her first offense, as she got a 2-year suspended sentence and a $10,000 fine, which was from her share alone of the marital assets. The 2 guys didn't fare as well because they had shady histories. One got a year in prison before parole was possible, and the one with the illegal items got 5 years before parole was possible. Part 4 of my plan did not end when the divorce was final, although I will not admit here or anywhere else that I had anything to do with it. Just karma is what I always respond when asked about it. 18 months after the divorce was final, I was on a cruise of the Caribbean with a year-old hot little divorcee who loved to be treated right and richly. She looked too much like Laura at that age and was too hot for me to look for a permanent relationship with her, but she was fun to be with, even though she wore me out. While I was dating on the cruise, Laura's apartment was broken into while she was at work. The place was trashed. Some items were stolen during the break-in, including the second most provocative and valuable Romano photo of Laura. More items were destroyed than stolen, however, including 7 of the other 8 remaining Romano photos and all of the family photo albums. Upon my return, I became a suspect. While it was impossible for me to have committed the crime myself since I was on a boat 2,000 miles away, Laura insisted to the cops that I paid someone to carry it out. As soon as the cops approached me and hinted that I was a suspect, I refused to talk to them and sought legal representation. After scrutinizing my phone and financial records, which naturally excluded the 2 cashed-out bearer bonds that were never part of the divorce estate, they found no evidence that I could have paid anyone for the act. Furthermore, there was no association found with anyone capable of committing such deeds. 6 months after their initial contact with me, it seemed that the cops practically gave up, even though I am sure that Laura continued to pester them. Once the statute of limitations expired, I threw a part of my "it's all finally over" celebration, attended mostly by friends. My parents were no longer alive, but my brother, his wife, my 2 nephews, my new love interest Melody's 2 adult children, and Grace, her husband, and my granddaughter were present. I had no relationship with Angela, was not invited to her wedding, and wouldn't have attended even if invited. I learned from Grace that Angela's husband caught her cheating, and she is in the early stages of divorce proceedings. Laura gave Grace an ultimatum: either sever all ties with me or with her. To everyone's surprise, including mine, Grace chose me, likely because she was convinced that Laura was, as I had represented, a pathological liar. More importantly, Grace recognized the negativity of her mother throwing her relationship with her paramour in her daughter's face and having them lie to cover up her cheating. Grace didn't want her children exposed to that attitude. Only one thing has caused friction between Grace and me in the last 5 years. I disclosed the truth about the DNA testing. She was initially upset with me but forgave me, just as I forgave her for her duplicity over the years. She was actually very pleased that I was her biological father, and I had another DNA test done to provide additional confirmation.
Story 2.
At my wedding, my golden child sister tried to steal the spotlight by announcing her pregnancy with a cake, so I exposed her cheating and ruined her marriage instead. So, 3 days back, I, 28, female, got married to my boyfriend of 5 years, Jason, 28, male. My bratty youngest sister, Allison, 26, was also attending, and she had planned on stealing my thunder. But unfortunately for her, I was 2 steps ahead of her the entire time. About a week ago, the baker who was responsible for our wedding cake told me that my sister had contacted her and said that she wanted her to bring in another cake for the day of the wedding and said that she wanted it to be a pregnancy announcement cake. Allison had told her that apparently I was the one who had asked for this, but had told her to contact the baker. She had even offered to pay twice the amount that I was paying her for the cake to bring it in, and keep this a secret from me because apparently my sister wanted to surprise me. Thankfully, she knew better than to trust someone else, and this was someone with ethics and morals, so she decided to speak to me about it first. As soon as she told me all of this, I put 2 and 2 together, and I figured that Allison was probably going to pull some stupid attention-seeking stunt at my wedding, and I was right about it as well. So I decided to stay ahead of her. I could have easily uninvited her, but I was really annoyed that she was trying to screw up the one day that was supposed to be about me. It seemed like she just couldn't tolerate my happiness, and it really made me very upset because even though I did not like her either, I would never do idiotic things like this for attention. Anyway, I decided to get back at her, and that's what has literally divided the family right now. My parents are really pissed at me for what I did. Allow me to explain what happened. So, on the day of the wedding, everything went smoothly during the ceremony, and it was after that that the cake was supposed to be cut. But as soon as Jason and I were about to cut our cake, Allison said that she had an announcement to make and had our baker bring in another cake. Everyone else was shocked apart from Jason and me because I had already told him that this was going to happen and I had planned ahead for it. Her cake was a pregnancy announcement. It had "Congratulations on the new baby" written on it in icing, and as soon as people saw that, they started going berserk and trying to congratulate her and her husband. My parents were the worst. They literally started sobbing and completely forgot about me. At least some of my relatives had the good sense to stand by my side and not gather around her because, after all, it was my wedding. And this was extremely inappropriate. After everyone was done congratulating her, she had the most smug look on her face when she said that we should probably get back to our wedding. I decided to call out the one person that I knew could screw all of this up for her. To be honest, I didn't even care that this was happening at my wedding. It just made things more memorable for everyone, especially my sister. So after she said that we should probably get back to our wedding, I smiled at her and told her that I was really happy for her. And that was a bit surprising for her. But then I also faked confusion and asked her to hold up because someone important was missing and the celebration was incomplete without that special someone. That was the cue for my special guest to walk into the room, just like we had planned. I know you guys have been waiting to find out who exactly this person is, so it just so happened to be Allison's ex-boyfriend, whom she dated right before her husband. Her husband, Eric, 28, male, and she used to work together when they started dating. Before that, Allison had been with Jared, 26, male, her ex-boyfriend from college. They had been living together but had been having a lot of relationship problems because Jared was ready to get married, and Allison was not. From what I know, there was definitely an overlap because my mother told me that Allison started dating Eric 3 years ago, and they have been married for 1 year now, but I have a couple of mutual friends with Jared. And they told me that he and Allison had not even broken up until almost 2.5 years back. I had calculated the timings of the two relationships last year at their wedding, and I had come to the conclusion that there was no way that there hadn't been any overlap. She had been two-timing Jared and Eric for at least 6 months. Even Jared knew about it, and he must have figured it out by the time that she got married, but he had the good sense not to speak about it. And he was too kind to ruin her relationship with Eric on purpose back then. I also did not speak about it for the past 1 year or even before that since I didn't think that it was worth it. So nobody realized that Allison had kind of been cheating on Eric in the beginning of their relationship. However, I didn't think there was any need for me to hide this from people anymore since she was going out of her way to create drama and seek attention even on the day of my wedding. This is why, after the baker had contacted me to tell me about what Allison was planning, I let her go ahead with her plan and decided to contact Jared behind her back, because I thought it was time that Eric found out the truth. There were also a couple of other reasons for me to go through with this thing, which I didn't even know about until I spoke to Jared. When I called him last week, I was skeptical about whether he would want to be part of this or not, because this was just drama between Allison and me. He really didn't need to get involved, but as soon as I told him that Allison was pregnant and was planning on announcing it at my wedding, he seemed to be really shocked because apparently she had kept in touch with him all these years. It wasn't like she had expressed her love for him or anything, but every couple of weeks, she would ask him how he was doing and what he was up to. Correct me if I'm wrong, but if you have broken up with your ex and are married to somebody else, there's no need for you to keep in touch with your ex. Especially when you didn't even break up with that guy until you were sure about the other one. So she seemed to be doing very nicely, and Jared thought that she was kind of leading him on. He also noticed that for the past couple of weeks she had not contacted him, and it was probably because of the pregnancy. He felt betrayed because she had made him feel like she still cared about him, even though she was married to someone else and had given him hope. So when I told him my plan, it took a bit of convincing, but he eventually agreed to come by. When he walked into the room on the day of my wedding, Allison's smile was wiped right off her face. Everyone else who knew Jared also stopped smiling, and everything got really tense and awkward. Jared did not wait around for long and did not even beat around the bush. He walked right up to Allison and congratulated her on the pregnancy, and then he told Eric that it was quite sweet of him to allow her to still keep in touch with him. Even though they had broken up ages ago, and she had even been two-timing the two of them. Obviously, Eric had no idea about any of this, so he was very taken aback, and he didn't even know what to say. Once that was done, Jared thanked me and Jason for inviting him, and then walked back out. After that, there were a few minutes of silence, and then complete chaos. Eric started yelling at Allison about what he had just found out, and then the two of them stormed out. Then my parents started screaming at me for pulling off something as underhanded and insane as this just to get back at my sister for something so petty and small. But I wasn't interested in that, so I told them that if they didn't like what I had done, then they could leave as well. And they did, along with a couple of other guests who did not seem to approve of what I had done. The people who remained were a handful of relatives and most of my friends. Thankfully, not a lot of people had left, and we were still able to carry on with the wedding as planned. It was only that my parents were not attending anymore, and honestly, at the time, I was fine with it. After all of that was done, nobody brought up Allison anymore before leaving. They just congratulated me on the wedding and left. When we came back home after that, Jason and I were pretty sure that we had done the right thing, and truth be told, we still are. However, the day after our wedding, my parents gave me an ultimatum while visiting. They came by in the morning, and I was pretty surprised to see them because the last time that we had seen each other, I had told them that they were free not to attend my wedding, and they had left. But after that, they barged into my house and told me that because of me, my sister's marriage was in trouble. Apparently, Eric, like any other sane human being, was very upset with Allison because she had kept in touch with Jared in spite of being married to him for almost a year now. He was also very upset about the fact that there had been an overlap, because that meant that she had technically been cheating on him in the beginning of the relationship, and he had never even known about it. He felt like a fool, and I couldn't blame him for that. Allison had played him for a fool, and all I had done was expose her. I don't think I have done anything wrong. If anyone had ruined their marriage, it was Allison herself. I don't understand why my parents were blaming me for it, and I started fighting with them because I thought it was very unfair. But they told me that they were not here to argue with me. They were just here to tell me that if I did not apologize to Allison and Eric and tell them that everything Jared had said was something that I had put him up to as a prank, then they would never speak to me. I thought it was a really stupid idea because even if I said that it was all a prank, I don't think Eric is blind. And I'm pretty sure that he would be able to figure out that we were just trying to cover up for what had happened. More importantly, I really didn't want to do any of that. This was not a prank that had backfired, this was the truth, and I think it was important for it to come out eventually. I told my parents that I was not apologizing for anything, and if they didn't like that, they could go take a hike. They started screaming in my face, calling me selfish and petty because what Allison had done was nothing in comparison to what I had done. They said that I had gone completely overboard and I had lost my mind because this reflected badly not just on Allison but on the entire family, and I didn't even seem to care about that. Eventually, they left. We blocked each other, but I haven't been able to stop thinking about what they said. Maybe I did go kind of overboard, but it was Allison who started it, and her initial intention had been to make my wedding day about her, and I had given her exactly what she wanted. So I still don't understand how I'm the villain here. Anyway, Aita for ruining my sister's marriage? Update 1. Hey everyone! First of all, thank you so much for all the replies. It means a lot to me and my husband that so many people are on our side. I will also answer a couple of questions that people had for us. So, a lot of people wanted to know how exactly I had a lot of mutual friends with Jared. Basically, Jared and Jason went to the same high school, but since he was a junior, he was not friends with Jason himself. He just so happened to be a part of the football team, and a lot of Jason's friends were on the team, which is how they knew Jared. I'm friends with a lot of Jason's friends who were friends with Jared, and that's how I knew about their relationship and the overlap and everything. However, Jared and I were never particularly close, and this is the only time that we've spoken to each other much, while planning out this entire thing. So, unfortunately, I don't have an answer as to why exactly Jared had not cut her out of his life after their breakup, even after he had figured out that she had been cheating on him with Eric. We are not close enough to have had discussions like that, and I think that's very personal. I know that he is still in love with her, and I feel bad for him, but I'm not a shrink. I'm not going to get into it if I don't need to. I had a plan, he agreed to it, and that was all that we needed to talk about. Beyond this, I don't know anything about his feelings for Allison, or why he did what he did. As for Allison, of course, I wouldn't know what was going on in her head when she was trying to keep in touch with Jared. Even after she had broken up with him and was in a committed relationship with Eric, so unfortunately, I have no answers for that either. Anyway, it has been a week since my wedding, and now I'm really over this entire thing. I don't really care if Eric and Allison get divorced or if they choose to stay together, it just doesn't matter to me. It matters to my parents a lot, and I get that. We have already blocked each other, so we are not going to speak to each other anymore. I felt kind of bad about it, but I should have guessed that this is what it would come to eventually because I had always known that my sister is pretty much the golden child for them. It's sad, but it is what it is. I can't help it. Throughout my childhood, I have tried a lot to win my parents over, but my sister was the younger one, so she was just special to them. I won't lie, I used to be very jealous of her, but as we grew up, the jealousy turned into resentment, and I just started avoiding her. The only reason she was even invited to my wedding was because my parents insisted, and because she had invited me to hers. And as for what I had said about her being an attention seeker, that part is true. She really can't stand getting attention from everyone and always wants to make everything about herself. That was part of the reason that I had started avoiding her initially, and now, obviously, we are going to remain no contact with each other. I have not heard from anybody from the family yet, apart from the people that I know are on my side. Everyone else has either blocked me or doesn't want anything to do with me, and I'm fine with that. If me taking a stand for myself pisses people off so much, then they should probably not be in my life. I have also not kept in touch with Jared. I just thanked him through a text after everything was done on the day of my wedding, and he replied to it, saying that he was happy that he got the closure he needed. So, I don't know if Allison has reached out to him yet or not either. If she does, I'm pretty sure that he will tell me about it, but for now, everything is pretty suspiciously silent. In a way, though, it's good for me and Jason because we are getting to enjoy our life as newlyweds, and within a couple of days, we will be leaving for our honeymoon. I just hope and pray that whatever drama my parents or Allison have to cause, they do it before our honeymoon because once we are gone, I won't be entertaining this nonsense anymore. In fact, even if they try to reach out to me before that, I know what to do. I'm just going to put them in their place and end this once and for all because I think all of them have shown me exactly where I stand with them. And it's time I do the same for them as well. Update 2. I was right about Jared. He did reach out to me as soon as Allison texted him. It was only yesterday that I posted an update here, and a couple of hours after that. Jared texted me and told me that Allison had called him up and asked him to meet her. Apparently, she wanted to speak to him in person, and so he had gone to meet her in a cafe. But he got the shock of his life when he realized that both Allison and Eric were there. It was kind of an ambush, and as soon as he got there, he was about to leave. But Eric stopped him in his way and started screaming at him, telling him to stay away, as if it was Jared's fault. Jared brought up that point and said that he had no problem staying away from Allison. He had in fact actually wanted that for himself after their breakup because he needed time to heal and move on from her. But it was she who kept trying to come back into his life and kept in touch with him, so if Eric wanted somebody to scream at, he should probably scream at Allison instead of blaming him. Eric refused to believe any of that and said that Allison had told him that it was Jared who kept reaching out to her and she would just respond to him to be polite. But Jared was prepared with the receipts, so he just whipped out his phone and showed Eric the screenshots that he had of his conversations with Allison, and of course, all of them just proved that she was the one who kept reaching out to him. After that, Eric had nothing to say, so Jared took the opportunity to leave. And I'm pretty sure that after this, there is no way out of this for the two of them apart from getting a divorce. When Jared told me about all of this, he explained to me that he had gone to meet Allison this one final time because he actually did love her, but because of what she had done, he was never speaking to her again. And I think it's good for him. He needs to move on because Allison is simply not worth it. I also think that Eric needs to leave her as well because she's definitely messed up in the head. I can't imagine doing stuff like this to not one but two guys, one of whom you are about to have a baby with. It's just disgusting, and I'm sure that my parents will find a way to justify this as well and try to blame me for all of this. They haven't contacted me yet, but after what just happened, I'm pretty sure that they will, and I'm really just waiting for that because I have a lot of things to say to them as well. Update 3. So today, 3 days after my last update, my family finally came to visit me. I had told you guys that my parents had blocked me, and so had Allison. So instead of unblocking me and contacting me through texts or calls, they decided to pay me a visit so they could piss me off in person. Nevertheless, I still invited them so we could have a talk and end this weird and strange relationship that we had. My parents started off by telling me that throughout my life they had treated both of us equally, but I had always been jealous of my sister for no real reason. I mean, they had it completely backwards. They had never treated me equally, but I didn't end up angry. I just let them speak because I wanted to see where they were going with it. Then they told me that on the day of my wedding, my sister had just wanted to share my happiness. And that is why she had thought about announcing her pregnancy on the same day, because she genuinely thought that I would be happy for her. But it was clear that I had known about her plan from the beginning, and I was not on board with it, which is why I had organized that little situation with Jared. It was more than obvious that I wanted to embarrass and humiliate Allison, and my parents really couldn't figure out why, because obviously, they didn't think that Allison had done anything wrong. They even told me that if I really didn't agree with what Allison was planning on doing, then I should have spoken to her after I found out about her plans to announce the pregnancy from the baker and confronted her about it. And prevented the situation, instead of trying to get revenge on her for something so petty and insignificant. Then they finally told me that because of what I had done, inviting Jared to the wedding, which led to a confrontation between the two of them, Eric was now filing for divorce. Allison had apparently tried really hard to fight for her marriage, but Eric had made up his mind, and this couldn't be coming at a worse time because she was pregnant, and now she had no idea what to do. So they had come to me and were demanding that I not only apologize to Allison, but also cover all the expenses of the divorce proceedings and her medical expenses for the next couple of months. And even after that, if the need arises. Naturally, the entire idea of that was so absurd that I burst out laughing because I couldn't believe that my parents thought I was actually going to go through with that. They seemed shocked by the fact that I was laughing, and Allison told me that she was serious. She said that she had the money to cover all of this on her own. But because of what I had done, this should be a fitting punishment for me since I had been the one responsible for ruining a happy marriage. So I stopped laughing and told her that I had not ruined anyone's perfect marriage because if her marriage had actually been perfect, she would not have been reaching out to her ex every now and then. Even if it was just to check up on him, she wouldn't even have cared about him and wouldn't have had any ties with him. So if she really wanted somebody to blame, she should probably look in the mirror instead of trying to pin this on me. Then I told her that I will not be paying for anything at all because if we were really talking about things that have been ruined, she had ruined my wedding, or at least attempted to do that, and if I hadn't found out about it earlier, I would have been completely blindsided, and the entire wedding would have been about her pregnancy. She was just mad that I had outsmarted her and exposed all her lies to her husband. My parents tried to come to her defense, but I told them that throughout my life, they only thought that they had treated us equally. But everyone who knew us knew the truth. They had always been biased towards Allison, and even now they were encouraging her to be entitled and bratty, even though she had literally ruined her own marriage. If I'm being honest, my parents were partly responsible for her downfall because if they hadn't spoiled her rotten since she was a child, she might have turned out to be a better person. My parents started fighting with me after that, but I told them that I was not interested in dragging this argument out any further. We had wasted enough time during that discussion itself, and now that they had said what they had to say, I had said what I wanted to, and there was nothing more that we had to talk about. They still kept trying to talk to me, but I just was not interested. So I told Jason to deal with them and went back into my room so I could get some rest because it was exhausting talking to my family. Jason had stayed away from this discussion because he's a bit short-tempered, and I'm pretty sure that my family and their audacity would have triggered him a lot sooner, and he would have snapped. So it was better for him to stay out of this for his own sake, because I didn't want him getting worked up over something like this. Anyway, after a while, Jason was able to get them to leave by threatening them with the cops, and then it was just the two of us. I'm glad that we were able to get this over with before the honeymoon because now we can fully enjoy it without constantly worrying about what my parents and Allison are getting up to. Update 4, hey! So Jason and I left for our honeymoon 3 days ago, and we are really happy right now. After my parents and Allison left that day, they left no stone unturned to try and get me to feel bad for them, specifically Allison. They got a lot of relatives who were on their side to text me and tell me that what I was doing was incredibly messed up and that I had no right to screw up somebody's life like this, especially when they were about to have a baby. I honestly don't understand why all of them are blaming me because, as far as I'm concerned, I'm just a messenger. So I spoke to Jared about it, and the two of us decided that it was about time that everyone found out the truth. So he just posted the screenshot of his chats with Allison, and that was all that was needed since it just proved that she was the one who had wanted to keep in touch with him. After he made that post, people started getting even more mad at me, especially Allison and my parents. They thought that I was going out of my way to ruin her reputation and claimed that this was character assassination at its finest. They even threatened to file a lawsuit for defamation against me and Jared. But I really don't think that that is going to work because this is the truth, and it's not like we are spreading lies about them. More importantly, if they file a defamation lawsuit against me, I'll just sue them for harassment. It's tit for tat here, right? And anyway, I think Allison should worry more about the upcoming divorce proceedings and the custody battle because, if I was in her place, I would not be wasting my time trying to pick fights with other people. Thankfully, the people in my family who had been on my side all along have told me that they are not going to be keeping in touch with my parents or Allison anymore because it's very obvious that they are the problem here. They have been nothing but horrible to me all along, and I'm glad that people are finally getting to see what kind of people they really are. Initially, I had been feeling kind of bad because the family had been divided because of what I had done, but now I think that this is necessary. Anyway, right now, Jason and I are just going to focus on enjoying our honeymoon because this time is never going to come back to us. And unlike my parents and Allison, we have no intention of letting them spoil our lives. So we are going to make the most of the time that we have here. They won't be able to bother us if we don't let them.
Story 3.
Mark, weighing 325 pounds, and Sarah, having lost friends to heart attacks, faced concerns about Mark's health. In short, she limited their lovemaking encounters to 4 times a year, tied to weight loss goals. These occasions included Valentine's Day, their anniversary, and both birthdays. Over 2 years, Mark shed a substantial amount of weight, reaching around 207 pounds, but contemplated quitting after losing 118 pounds. After all, The journey had been arduous. When Mark expressed his desire to quit, Sarah adamantly refused. This is when she issued the threat that serves as the inspiration for this story. If Mark quit, he would only receive closeness 4 times a year, prompting Sarah to seek fulfillment elsewhere due to her lovemaking needs. In the moments following Sarah's threat, the foundation of their marriage trembled. It began when Mark's head snapped up, and he looked at her with shock and confusion. The foundation cracked as she witnessed sadness and hurt in his eyes, a result of her words. The marriage's foundation crumbled as his emotions shifted from sadness to anger and disgust. Sarah realized immediately that she had made a critical mistake. Sarah had pushed her beloved man to his limits to fulfill her desires for weight loss, then threatened infidelity as punishment. She questioned her own actions, realizing the impact on Mark. Mark expressed frustration, emphasizing the tremendous effort he put into losing over 100 pounds for Sarah's sake. He accused her of using closeness as a tool to manipulate him, expressing disappointment at her reward of continued deprivation and potential infidelity. Mark believed Sarah had jeopardized their marriage, introducing chaos into their home. He questioned her trustworthiness and speculated about her thoughts of infidelity throughout their 2-year journey. In conclusion, he felt Sarah had ruined their marriage, leaving him uncertain about what to believe. Sarah expressed regret, insisting that she never intended to engage in infidelity. Despite her plea, Mark, with a look of disgust, questioned the credibility of her words. He conveyed his seriousness about the situation, and a few minutes later left the kitchen table, heading into the garage to contemplate the situation. In the garage, Mark declared his need for time to think, leaving Sarah in tears as she realized the gravity of the situation. She sobbed, acknowledging the seed of doubt planted in Mark's mind, understanding the challenge of dispelling it. Reflecting on her actions, Sarah admitted her lack of consideration for Mark's feelings. She acknowledged her greed and desire for more, despite Mark's previous efforts. Now, she recognized the need to regain what she had lost. Mark, spending about an hour in the garage, engaged in activities to occupy his hands while contemplating the complexities of the situation. He didn't really think his wife had cheated on him over the last 2 years, but he wasn't sure. Earlier in the day, he would have been sure, but now, after her comment, he just couldn't be sure anymore. He didn't know either if she would have cheated on him in the future. Earlier, he would have never believed it, but now he wasn't sure anymore. He said out loud, "I need to find out." Mark walked back into the house. Sarah remained seated at the kitchen table, visibly distressed with red eyes and a red nose, a result of her recent tears. Mark observed her condition, feeling a sense of regret, yet he remained resolute in carrying out his decision. He communicated to Sarah his decision to abandon the diet, informing her that he would restrict their carnal moments to the previously agreed upon 4 times a year, or even none at all, leaving the choice to her discretion. Mark warned of severe consequences if she chose to engage in relations with someone else, expressing his intent to inflict physical damage on her potential lover. Mark sternly addressed Sarah, asserting that any infidelity on her part would lead to an immediate end of their relationship. He emphasized that he would not tolerate staying married to a cheater and labeled her as a fancy woman, indicating his lack of tolerance for unfaithfulness. He declared his mistrust and announced his intention to closely monitor her actions, cautioning her to be exceedingly careful. Concluding his message, Mark mentioned his departure for a while, indicating his absence for lunch, but assuring his presence for dinner. He offered the option of ordering food if she didn't feel like cooking, leaving the atmosphere charged with tension and uncertainty. Mark grabbed his car keys off the counter and walked out the back door into the garage. Moments later, Sarah heard the garage door open, and she heard Mark's car drive away. Sarah said out loud, "Oh my God, I can't believe this. How could I be so stupid?" She began sobbing again and just sat there, wishing she had kept her mouth shut. An hour or so later, she got up to go to the bathroom, then went and lay on her bed and cried some more. When Mark arrived home later that afternoon, he found her in the exact same position. Like so many husbands who suspected his wife of cheating, Mark decided to do some detective work on his own. He thought the easiest way to start was to drive to the telephone providers and request a printout of call logs on their home phone and on his wife's cell phone. Both were in his name, so he knew he would not be having any trouble getting the reports. The landline phone company told him he could have it electronically, and they were able to upload the call logs for the last 3 years onto a CD for him for a small fee. He gladly paid it and walked out of the office with everything he asked for. Yes, he requested 3 years because he wanted to be able to go back before he had started the diet to see if there had been any motivation for Sarah cutting him off in the first place. Next, he went to the cell phone company and requested identical data. They hesitated at first, since it was his wife's cell phone number he wanted the data for, but Mark pointed out that indeed it was a joint account with his name prominently on the records, so they had no reason to withhold any information he might request. They offered the data electronically as well, for a fee of $20. Mark thought it excessive, but probably worth the money, so he could more easily access the information. He did make a note, though, that perhaps he would rethink his cell phone provider in the future. Arriving at home around 4 p.m., Mark saw Sarah laying on their bed, sound asleep. He decided to let her sleep and went back to their home office, locking the office door so he would not be interrupted. He sat down at the computer and downloaded all of the data from the 2 CDs into a folder in his documents file. He had already formulated how he would conduct his search. He was going to start with 2 years ago and compile a list of every telephone number called in that first month when he started his diet and when Sarah had restricted his closeness to 4 times a year, plus rewards for goals achieved. That would have been September of 2008 on their home phone. September had 96 calls to 19 different numbers. He found that using the format the phone company had provided for him, he could sort the data in a number of different ways. So he created a list by numbers, showing the number, the date, the time, and the duration of the call. Once he got the system figured out, it took him about an hour and a half to create that list for every call made from their home phone in the last 2 years. He was just about ready to start the same process on Sarah's cell phone data when he heard the office door knob rattle. The door was locked, so no one could come in, so he saved everything he had been doing and stashed away all evidence of what he had been doing. He logged off the computer and went and opened the door to find the most pitiful sight he could imagine. There stood Sarah in a seriously disheveled state, hair a mess, eyes and nose red from crying and sniffling. Every once in a while she had her head bent down and only reluctantly looked up and into Mark's eyes. She expressed deep remorse to Mark, acknowledging the hurt and anger she caused. Sarah recognized her own selfish and cruel actions, admitting that she overstepped by interfering with his diet progress. She apologized sincerely, asking for forgiveness and acknowledging that the decision to continue the diet should have been solely his. Despite feeling the overwhelming influence of the situation, she pleaded with Mark to forgive her. Mark conveyed his forgiveness to Sarah, emphasizing that it was granted only based on the information available to him at the moment. He expressed his love for her and reminded her of the sacrifices he made during the 2-year struggle with his weight, including abstaining from closeness, all done for her. However, he admitted that he reached a breaking point and could no longer continue. Mark addressed the current situation, describing it as a gorilla in the room that needed to be addressed. He stressed the importance of knowing definitively whether or not she had cheated on him, as the uncertainty would drive him crazy. Mark outlined the conditions for their relationship moving forward, stating that if she had not cheated in the past and did not plan to in the future, they could be okay. However, he made it clear that he needed assurance. He held Sarah accountable for creating the mess with her hasty comment and threat, expressing his disbelief at her lack of consideration for his feelings and the damage it caused to his trust in her. Mark highlighted the need for her to deal with the consequences until he felt confident in their relationship. Sarah was hoping Mark would just forgive her and forget what she had said, but that was not to be. She thought, "I suppose I deserved everything that was happening to me, but I hoped it could all go away." She nodded her head slowly and resigned agreement and turned and walked dejectedly back to the bedroom and closed the door behind her. She lay on her bed again, not sobbing, but with tears streaking her face. Mark opened the bedroom door and asked, "Sarah, do you want something to eat?" Sarah said, "No, Mark, I am not hungry." Mark walked out to his car and drove off again to a place nearby called Grisham's. He and Sarah had gone there for drinks many times, and their food was excellent. He knew he could have a few beers and a greasy but delicious bacon cheeseburger. In the 2 years previous, he had not had more than 2 beers in a week's time and not 1 bacon cheeseburger. Tonight, he was going to give in and have what he wanted. He knew that he would never allow himself to get overweight like he had been before. But tonight, he was going to splurge and enjoy his dinner, even though his heart was breaking. When he got home, he went back to the office and began working on the call log from Sarah's cell phone. Because he already knew the drill, it was easier to finish the cell phone list, and he was done in half the time. After reviewing the 2 lists, Mark determined that over the course of 2 years, they had 3,482 calls made in total, from a total of 45 different telephone numbers. He decided to sort the calls by telephone number and had some surprising results. There were almost 300 calls to his cell phone, about 200 calls to his parents' number, and a similar number of calls to Sarah's parents' number. There were close to that many to each of Sarah's sisters, and about half that number to his brother John. In addition, there was a scattering of calls to various friends whom Mark recognized the numbers, and a few to other numbers he didn't recognize. Going down the list, though, he discovered that there were over 200 calls to a number he didn't recognize, and another 50-plus calls to a second number he didn't recognize. Then he realized there were some calls, 30 or more, to additional numbers that were made over the course of 2 years. He assumed those might be hair salons, stores, church, etc. None of those statistics bothered Mark much, so he just noted them and went back to the 2 major unrecognizable numbers. Being the type of guy Mark was, he decided to refine his research a little more and sorted the calls by day and time. For those 2 numbers, the surprising results gave him the chills, and almost immediately, he was burning up with suspicion and anger. Every Wednesday at 11 a.m., Mark attended a staff meeting with his boss and other department heads at a local restaurant with meeting rooms. They convened in conference for an hour, took a 1-hour lunch break, and concluded their business by 2:30 p.m. or 3 p.m. consistently. Every week, at 10:55 a.m., without fail, there was a call to him on his cell phone. Yes, some weeks were missed, but Mark instantly recognized those were the weeks he was on vacation. But the rule remained. Every Wednesday at 10:55 a.m., at 11:05 a.m. every Wednesday, a call was made to the first of the 2 numbers Mark didn't recognize. He was burning up now. It seemed too much of a coincidence not to be suspicious. Mark knew at that moment that what he was going to discover would not bring him joy. Persevering, he looked at the second number and quickly realized that these calls were consistently placed on Fridays. On Friday afternoons once a month, Mark played golf with his brother and their best friends, finishing the 18 holes around 5:30 p.m. They would stop in the clubhouse for a couple of drinks before heading home, usually reaching home before 6:30 p.m. On those Fridays, he would shower and take Sarah out to eat. What angered him was that Sarah always called him just before he teed off to express her love and let him know she would be waiting when he finished his round and got home. Mark now understood what was going on, but he lacked visual proof or knowledge of the person with whom she was cheating. The scary part was wondering how long it had been going on, and if it started only when Sarah cut him off, or if it began earlier. So, he extended his investigation another year and discovered that the same calls were made once a month for the 3 months before he was cut off. Whatever Sarah was doing, she had been doing it 3 months earlier, but not as frequently. All he had to do now was figure out who and then decide what he was going to do about it. Mark thought finding out who would be easy. He ran a reverse lookup on the first number and found it to be a cell phone number not listed. He ran the reverse lookup on the second number and discovered it was listed to a Tony Batali. Of course, Mark knew exactly who Tony Batali was. He was Mark's trainer at the gym. Sarah had initially found him for Mark, so Sarah was calling Tony on the Fridays when Mark golfed, Mark thought. He noted the address in his call log spreadsheet and decided to go out again for a while. Upon returning to Grisham's, Mark had a couple more beers. When things quieted down after the dinner rush, he approached the rather attractive bartender Brenda, seeking help. He briefly explained the situation and requested Brenda to determine if the first number belonged to Tony. He dialed the number and instructed Brenda to ask for Tony, and, if it was him, to mention that a woman had given her the number as a potential trainer. If it was Tony, she should tell him that if he had openings, she would stop by the gym one of these days. Brenda, after taking the phone, inquired if the person on the other end was Tony. She explained that she was Jennifer, a woman she didn't know who had received Tony's name from someone at her hair salon. The suggestion was made during a conversation about getting in better shape. Jennifer provided some personal details, mentioning her age, 24, height, 5 feet 6 inches, and current weight, around 130 pounds. Despite feeling a bit scrutinized over the phone, she acknowledged that she could improve her fitness and happiness by reaching a weight of around 115 pounds. Expressing gratitude for the compliment, Jennifer inquired about Tony's availability. Upon learning that an opening had recently become available due to a client quitting, she expressed her interest. Jennifer indicated her intention to visit Tony in a couple of days to discuss the necessary steps to achieve her fitness goals. She thanked Tony and concluded the conversation, looking forward to meeting him soon. Mark sat there in amazement at what Brenda just did. She verified that it was Tony from the gym and discovered that indeed he did smack on women who used him as a trainer. She even verified that he had an opening because of a dropout. Mark thought that dropout had to be me. Damn. Sarah already called Tony to tell him what happened and to warn him to be ultra careful. The funny thing, though, as he sat there feeling lower than dirt, was the humor in what Brenda had said. He didn't know or care how much she actually weighed. She was hot just like she was. She didn't need to lose an ounce anywhere. Mark smiled at her and told her she was too funny, and that he thought she was perfect the way she was, so she better stay away from Tony. He said, "No one could have a more perfect body than you do, Brenda." Brenda responded to Mark's compliment with a beautiful smile, expressing gratitude and addressing him as a kind sir. She acknowledged Mark's attractiveness, describing him as a hunk, and expressing confusion about why his wife would seek companionship elsewhere. Mark, reciprocating the smile, acknowledged Brenda's words. Mark admitted that 2 years ago he might not have been considered a hunk, but he firmly stated that it didn't justify his wife's act of cheating. He thanked Brenda for her assistance, both in gathering information about Tony and boosting his deflated ego. Mark expressed his appreciation and mentioned that he should head home. He thanked Brenda once more for her support and understanding. Mark went home, and because it was late, he just went to bed. As he crawled into bed, he looked across at Sarah and was hit with a feeling of loss and disappointment. He didn't think he had ever been this low in his life, but he was also certain that before it was all over, he would feel even worse. Sarah had awakened slightly when he crawled in and said, "I love you, Mark." Mark just grunted at that and turned away from her and tried to sleep. Of course, he couldn't get to sleep right away and just lay there thinking for quite a while. He was certain that he heard a sob or two from Sarah, but she obviously had calmed down somewhat. In the morning, Mark woke up to find Sarah spooned against him, her body pressing into his back. Sensing his arousal, she reached around and placed her hand on him, expressing remorse for her previous words and requesting closeness. Mark, aware of his vulnerability, resisted the temptation, citing the need to get going that morning and the established boundaries. Mark reminded Sarah of the cutoff he had communicated earlier, emphasizing that such attempts should not be repeated. He left the bed, showered, and headed to work. Sarah, left alone, muttered to herself about deserving the consequences of her words and the accompanying emotional pain. Upon reaching work, Mark confided in his boss about the issues at home, briefly explaining the situation and receiving support. The boss advised him to take any necessary time off to address his suspicions. Mark's boss also provided the name of a reputable electronics distributor for surveillance equipment. Expressing gratitude, Mark informed his boss that he would be taking time off from Wednesday through Friday, planning to pursue his suspicions. The boss, understanding Mark's intentions, wished him good luck with a smile. Mark went to the electronics distributor's location and found out that his boss had called ahead and instructed them to assist him with whatever he needed. Visual evidence seemed challenging for him, but he felt recording was manageable. He acquired 3 top-of-the-line bugs with battery life sufficient to transmit many hours of activity to a receiver within a couple of city blocks when the operator downloaded the data. When Mark got home, a special dinner awaited him on the table, his favorite lasagna with garlic bread and sweet green peas. He thanked Sarah for the wonderful meal and excused himself to go and watch some television. Sarah cleaned up the kitchen and joined him in the TV room, being cautious not to push in too close at bedtime. She headed to their bedroom, giving Mark the chance to plant one of the bugs inside their home phone, ensuring a complete record of every conversation on that phone. Both parties in the conversation would be heard. Though nervous about bugging Sarah's cell phone, he decided to proceed without worrying too much. It only took a few minutes, and he was done. Now he had a source of information from either phone. The challenging part Mark faced was planting a bug in Tony's phone. While Mark already had bugs on Sarah's phones, he considered the possibility that she might use a different phone, such as a payphone, to communicate with Tony. To cover all bases, Mark decided to try bugging Tony's phone. Recalling that Tony worked closely with a well-built blonde woman on Wednesday mornings, Mark suspected their interactions and felt the need to gather more information. He planned to seize the opportunity when Tony was preoccupied with the blonde woman to discreetly install the bug. Mark envisioned Tony being so engrossed with the blonde woman that he wouldn't notice Mark's actions. He went to the gym and saw Tony's phone sitting on his towel about 10 feet from where Tony was with the blonde. It would be risky to get the phone, but he thought, what the hell do I have to lose? He snuck in, slipped the phone into his pocket, backed out of the gym, and went into the men's room. There, he easily inserted the bug into Tony's phone. The tricky part would be getting the phone back on the towel. When he returned to the gym, he could see that Tony was wrapping it up with the blonde. He knew he would never make it to the towel and back without being spotted. Damn, he thought. How am I going to do this? After a few seconds, he decided to try to slide the phone across the floor to the towel, hoping to get it close enough so Tony wouldn't be suspicious. It involved some risk, but he went ahead and slid the phone. Despite making some noise, Tony, engrossed in the blonde, remained oblivious. Fortunately, he slid it forcefully enough for it to reach the towel, hitting it hard and sliding underneath. It was perfect. Mark believed there was no way Tony could be suspicious now, so he swiftly left the gym. At precisely 10:55 a.m., his cell phone rang. It was Sarah. She said she wanted to touch base before his meeting. Of course, Mark never disclosed he was off work the rest of the week, let alone skipping the meeting. After about 10 minutes, Mark began monitoring the bugs using the receiver from his car. Tony's phone rang, and he picked up quickly. Tony greeted Sarah, asking if she wanted to meet at his house as usual. Sarah expressed caution, stating Mark was highly suspicious, and they might need to quit meeting for a while to avoid trouble. Tony grumbled, reluctant to give up their encounters. Mark groaned as he heard Sarah's response. Acknowledging the risk, she admitted that the first time they had closeness, she knew she'd do anything to be with him. She initially cut Mark off to enjoy their time more with Tony. Though she loved him, she couldn't take the chance now. She suggested they might resume their weekly encounters in a few weeks, but, in the meantime, Tony would have to be content with one of his other girlfriends. Sarah wasn't jealous of Tony's other relationships and proposed considering meeting on the Fridays Mark went golfing. She needed time to think about it and promised to let Tony know if it could work out. Mark had suffered enough, making him sick and angry. He was determined to get revenge, having endured Tony's advances even before he started the diet. She had used the diet as an excuse to enhance her encounters with Tony. For the past 2.5 years, Sarah had been meeting with Tony every Wednesday and on the monthly golfing Fridays, totaling over 100 encounters. Mark questioned how she could claim to love him while engaging in such behavior, and speculated about the possibility of other involvements. Regardless, Tony's involvement alone was enough for Mark to decide on revenge against both of them. Over the next 2 days, he devised plans, established contacts, and ensured favorable conditions for the weekend. Monitoring phone taps, Mark discovered that Sarah had arranged a beautician appointment for Friday morning in a conversation on Thursday. In the conversation with her beautician Janine, Sarah explained her desire for a new and close-knessy hairstyle to distract Mark from suspicions of infidelity. She mentioned the intention to purchase provocative lingerie to further divert his attention. When asked about Tony, Sarah admitted she might temporarily reduce their encounters, but laughed it off, suggesting it wasn't a permanent decision. Despite the laughter, Mark felt devastated by the revelations, yet his anger began to drive him, burying the hurt deep inside. Tony initiated contact on Friday, proposing an immediate rendezvous with Sarah. She expressed her intense desire, but conveyed her reluctance due to the risk involved, asking for patience until Mark's suspicions subsided. With each conversation, Mark's heartbreak deepened, struggling to comprehend any love in their relationship. He perceived Sarah's actions as purely selfish, devoid of concern or respect for him. Mark pondered where things had gone wrong, but remained determined to carry out his revenge. On Saturday, after lunch, the doorbell rang and Sarah opened it to find Brenda, who introduced herself as a friend of Mark's. Brenda mentioned Mark's approval for her to spend time by the pool. Sarah, taken aback, agreed to show her to the pool. However, Brenda noticed Sarah's lack of a smile, and a subtle smile appeared on her face. Shortly after, Sally and Linda arrived, both informing Sarah that Mark had invited them to use the pool. They shared their connections with Mark, Sally having worked with him for years, and Linda having served them at Grisham's. Sarah, confronted with the presence of 3 attractive women, began to feel uneasy, contemplating various possibilities. The 3 women settled on chaise lounge chairs, applying suntan lotion to themselves. It didn't take them long to agree to apply sunscreen to each other to ensure they didn't miss any spots. Once they were thoroughly coated, they lay on the loungers and began soaking in the sun. Shortly afterward, they decided an all-over tan would be better. Each woman tied the strings on their bikini tops and dropped them on the towel beside the lounger. Sarah was upset and wanted to ask them to leave, but since Mark had invited them, she had to tread lightly, knowing she was already on thin ice with him. At 3:30 p.m., Brenda approached Sarah and took a seat, revealing that she worked as a bartender at Grisham's. She disclosed that on the night Sarah issued the ultimatum, Mark had stopped by for a few drinks and shared all the details about their situation. Sarah appeared startled, and Brenda expressed her belief that Sarah had made a significant mistake. Continuing, Brenda informed Sarah that Mark was now suspicious and actively investigating their situation. She conveyed Mark's warning to Sarah, stating that if he discovered past or future infidelity, he intended to be carnal with Brenda, Sally, and Linda for each instance of cheating. Sarah, shocked, attempted to respond, but Brenda interjected, adding that Mark also planned to question Sarah, and if she lied, he would be carnal with one of them for each lie. Brenda hinted that they found Mark attractive and were open to being carnal with him. Brenda, already aware of Sarah's past infidelity, anticipated Mark's carnal involvement with her. She also anticipated that Sarah, in an attempt to conceal her actions, would likely lie, leading to a busy time for Mark, satisfying the 3 women. Sally joined Brenda and took a seat, sharing that she had known Mark for several years and always found him handsome and sweet. Despite his weight gain, she believed he remained the same sweet guy she had known. Sally admitted to having a crush on him, which had only intensified since he lost the excess weight. She acknowledged the troubles between Sarah and Mark and expressed her willingness to pursue a relationship with Mark, stating that he could have her anytime he wanted. Linda also chimed in, expressing that she had been observing Sarah and Mark for a couple of years. She noticed the love Mark showed for Sarah, and she made it clear that she had her eye on them. Linda's statement suggested her interest in Mark and her observation of their relationship dynamics. Linda acknowledged Mark's kindness and consideration towards Sarah, expressing admiration for their relationship. She mentioned feeling fortunate to witness such a loving connection and admitted to fantasizing about being in Sarah's position. Linda acknowledged Mark's remarkable weight loss of 118 pounds to make Sarah happy and his transformation into a hunk. She conveyed her admiration for him and expressed a desire to have a man like him in her life. At precisely 4 p.m., as planned, Mark walked out onto the pool deck, observing the presence of Sarah and the 3 women. He greeted Sarah and commented on the women's improved tans. Mark playfully remarked on the women's beautiful bodies, suggesting they might give him a hard time. He encouraged Sarah to join in the playful banter and jokingly asked why she hadn't removed her top. Sarah, upset by the afternoon's events, reluctantly complied. Mark then posed 2 questions to Sarah, emphasizing the need for honest answers. He inquired if, at any point during their marriage, she had cheated on him. Sarah firmly denied any infidelity. Mark pressed further, specifically mentioning Tony from the gym. Sarah maintained her denial, expressing confusion about where such an idea originated. Mark continued to question Sarah about her involvement with Tony, mentioning their regular Wednesday meetings and Friday afternoons when he played golf. Despite Mark's detailed knowledge of her affair, Sarah, shocked, stuck to her denial, hoping he lacked concrete evidence. Each of the women present, Brenda, Sally, and Linda, sat with satisfied grins, anticipating the unfolding revelation. Mark proceeded to expose the evidence he had gathered, including phone logs from both the landline and Sarah's cell phone. He described the pattern of calls, pointing out the regularity of her contact with Tony. Mark even had Brenda call the number, confirming it belonged to Tony. Although Mark didn't possess pictures of Sarah and Tony together, he expressed his conviction that the weekly calls were not innocent. In shock, Sarah realized the extent of Mark's knowledge, understanding that their relationship was about to face significant challenges. As she attempted to respond, Mark intervened, stating that there was little to be said and nothing that could convince him of her innocence. Despite his deep love for her, Mark admitted that his current emotions, hurt, disgust, and anger, outweighed his love. Mark introduced the three women, Sally, Linda, and Brenda, explaining their connections to him. He described Sally as a longtime work associate, acknowledging her beauty and sweetness. Mark disclosed that he was aware of Sally's crush on him, but he never acted on it out of respect for his marriage to Sarah. Sally smiled, recognizing their genuine friendship. Linda's acquaintance with Mark began during their visits to Grisham's when she served them. Mark revealed Linda's fantasy of being with him, emphasizing her admiration for him. He complimented Linda's physical attributes, particularly praising her chest. Mark expressed his intention to indulge in the experience with Linda. Brenda, the newest acquaintance, was introduced as a seasoned bartender who showed empathy and compassion during a conversation about Mark's distress at Grisham's. Mark highlighted Brenda's assistance in obtaining information and forming a connection with her. As Mark spoke, Sarah teetered on the edge of a breakdown, visibly emotional. Tears flowed, and her breathing became erratic. Despite her desire to convey something to Mark, she remained silent. Mark, acknowledging the interest expressed by the three women, revealed his anticipation of enjoying carnal encounters with them, exploring sensuality in every aspect. However, he reiterated his commitment to not be unfaithful in his marriage and expressed the need to end the marriage with Sarah to pursue these relationships. Mark conveyed his reluctance to violate his pledge and asserted that terminating the marriage was the only solution. Brenda produced divorce papers from her bag and informed Sarah, a bartender by night and a process server by day, that she was being served. Sarah, overwhelmed with emotions, broke into tears at the delivery. In an attempt to plead with Mark, she apologized profusely and expressed her love, pleading with him to reconsider. Mark responded, expressing doubt about Sarah's love, citing her actions over the past 2 years as evidence. He emphasized that the issue went beyond a couple of instances, believing it occurred over 100 times. The court hearing was set for next Friday, and after the legal separation, Mark planned to commence relationships with the three women. He suggested that indulging in pleasures with them might help him find forgiveness for Sarah's affair with Tony and understand the satisfaction it brought her. Mark expressed the hope that a lasting connection with the new relationships could provide the love and support he had believed he had with Sarah. Mark informed the three women that it was time for them to leave, assuring them that he would be in touch individually. He then went into the house to gather a few belongings, preparing for a stay at a hotel until Friday, when either he or Sarah would officially move out. Unable to form coherent thoughts, Sarah remained seated by the pool, now crying softly. Mark emerged through the patio doors, placed his suitcases down, and approached her. Sarah wasn't sure what more he had to say, but it quickly became evident. Mark reminded her of the consequences he had forewarned for her lover. As it turned out, when she supposedly canceled on Tony the previous day, he pursued a relationship with the well-endowed blonde co-worker he warmed up with every Wednesday morning from 9:30 a.m. to 10:30 a.m., his prelude before their rendezvous. It seems Brenda, Sally, and Linda will have a similar effect on Mark, hoping it transforms him into a love-making dynamo for them. By the way, the blonde was Gino Margarella's wife. Gino took offense to Tony's involvement with his wife, and he, along with a couple of his associates, subjected Tony to a severe beating. Tony's face is now a mess, with a few remaining teeth and some broken ribs. Gino even allowed Mark the privilege of delivering a significant blow to Tony's groin. The outcome? It's doubtful Tony will produce any more hot seed, and there's skepticism about his ability to engage in lovemaking activities again. Mark, of course, will deny any involvement in Tony's fate. Moreover, Friday, being his golf day, conveniently provides Mark with an alibi through his brother and friends. Wishing Sarah a great life, Mark informed her they would meet in court the following Friday. That day, Sarah was left alone in tears. Within the next 2 hours, she packed her bags and headed to her mother's place. The divorce process took 7 months, leaving Sarah devastated and sinking into deep depression. Contrary to what he claimed about the other ladies, Mark had no intention of following through. Instead, he found solace in 2 golden retrievers and ultimately discovered unconditional true love.
Story 4. For years, life had been a steady hum of routine. Tracy and I had built a life together brick by brick, raising 2 daughters, managing careers, and navigating the ordinary challenges of marriage. But when the last of our kids moved out, leaving the house eerily quiet, we found ourselves in unfamiliar territory. For the first time in decades, it was just us. No distractions, no noise, no buffer of busy schedules. It was exciting at first, a chance to rekindle the spark we had in the beginning, but it also exposed the cracks we had long ignored. I first noticed a shift in Tracy when she joined a new book club, which wasn't just about books. It was hosted at a trendy wine bar downtown, where the conversation often veered into fitness regimens, travel plans, and the kind of lives the younger attendees were carving out for themselves. Tracy came home from those evenings flushed with excitement, recounting anecdotes about so-and-so's new business venture or another's adventurous trip to Bali. I could see her eyes light up in a way I hadn't witnessed in years. Around the same time, she became more focused on her appearance. Tracy had always been naturally beautiful, but now she was investing in herself with a newfound intensity. Regular salon visits, new clothes, and hours at the gym. It was hard not to notice how heads turned when we went out. I admired her renewed confidence, though a small part of me wondered if she was looking for validation beyond what I could give her. My own life was quieter by comparison. I had my work, my routines, and the occasional evening spent with friends over a glass of whiskey and a game of cards. I told myself that Tracy and I were simply finding our own paths in this new phase of life, but I couldn't shake the sense that she was drifting further away. It was subtle at first, a missed laugh here, a distracted look there, but over time the distance between us became palpable. 6 months ago, I overheard her talking with a friend at a neighborhood barbecue. The conversation wasn't meant for my ears, but I couldn't help but catch a stray comment about how she envied people who found themselves later in life. The word stuck with me, and I began to question whether Tracy still saw herself as part of an us, or if she was searching for something I couldn't offer. Last week, I decided to take action. I planned a surprise dinner at our favorite restaurant, the one where we'd celebrated anniversaries and milestones. I wanted a reminder of the bond we shared, the years we'd spent building a life together. The evening started well. Laughter, wine, and a lingering glance or two that hinted at the Tracy I fell in love with. But by the time we got home, that connection felt fragile again, like it could break with a single misplaced word. "Mark, you're utterly unbelievable!" Tracy exclaimed, her voice radiating enthusiasm. Her words lingered in the room, creating a peculiar cocktail of joy and discomfort. The compliment hit me with an unexpected force, halting everything in its tracks. My chest tightened, my breath shallow as though I'd just sprinted up a steep hill. Wait just a moment. After nearly 3 decades of marriage, how could she harbor even a hint of memory about someone else? Worse, how could she let it slip aloud, especially during such an intimate moment? Up until that point, the evening had felt almost flawless. "God, Mark, you know exactly how to turn my world upside down," she said again, her tone dripping with admiration. I stayed where I was, head resting against her left thigh, motionless. Tracy lay there, her breathing still heavy. I couldn't tell if she even realized what she'd just said or the storm it had stirred in my head. "Aren't you going to keep going?" she asked after a beat, her expression shifting to mild confusion. "I'm wiped out, babe. You took everything I had," I replied, forcing a small smile. She leaned over to kiss me before settling back into the pillows. Normally, this was when we'd curl up together, basking in the afterglow before heading to the bathroom to freshen up. But as I lay there, Tracy drifted off quickly, her breathing softening into the quiet rhythm of sleep. I slipped out of bed carefully, washed up in the bathroom, and made my way downstairs. Wrapped in my robe, I poured myself a generous glass of Staley's rye whiskey and sank into the armchair in my den. My thoughts refused to settle. Sometimes having a mind that won't shut off is more of a curse than a blessing. Most men wouldn't have caught or cared about what Tracy said in the heat of the moment. But I'm not most men. As I sipped my drink, I replayed the evening in my mind, searching for any missed signs. Anything to suggest there was something off in our marriage. But everything had seemed normal. Better than normal, actually. Tracy and I had been more intimate in the past 6 months than we'd been in years. I chalked it up to finally being alone after raising kids for 25 years. In that time, Tracy had dropped 20 pounds and started dressing in a way that showcased her renewed confidence. At 51, she had reclaimed her college weight of 120 pounds and didn't hesitate to show it off. Her figure was stunning. Flawless skin, a sculpted waist, and legs that turned heads. She'd always been a natural beauty, and even with a little extra weight in the past, she exuded energy and vibrancy. I had no doubt she always would. We met in college as sophomores and dated for 2 years before tying the knot at 22. Tracy had always been a bit of a flirt, but it was playful and harmless, or so I believed. I never doubted her loyalty, not even once. Until tonight. Damn it. She's always known the power her looks gave her, wielding them like a charm that could disarm anyone. And she wasn't wrong. My thoughts drifted back to something I overheard 6 months ago at her office. Rhonda Nichols had been ranting in the break room, unaware that Tracy could hear every word. Earlier, Tracy had walked past Rhonda and Carl Walters, interrupting their conversation with nothing more than a smile. Carl had turned to watch her walk away, ignoring Rhonda entirely, much to her irritation. Tracy found the whole thing amusing. This wasn't a new experience for Tracy. She'd been commanding attention since her teenage years, thanks to her striking looks. Blonde hair, piercing blue eyes, and curves that had heads turning wherever she went. Even now, she knew she could stop people in their tracks without trying. And while she privately acknowledged the extra weight she carried until recently, never seemed to dull her confidence or her allure. But Rhonda's irritation sparked something competitive in Tracy. Instead of joining her friends for lunch that day, she signed up for a gym membership, her resolve sharpened by Rhonda's offhand comments. Tracy had no intention of letting anyone, least of all Rhonda, think she was anything less than spectacular. Back in my den, now on my third drink, my thoughts wandered further back in time, to the day I first saw Tracy. We were sophomores at a big Midwestern university. I was the quiet math nerd, staying in shape but hardly standing out, while Tracy was nothing short of a goddess. She moved through campus like royalty, always surrounded by a crowd of admirers. I knew who she was, but I never had the nerve to approach her. Why would I? Guys far more impressive than me were practically throwing themselves at her feet. A few weeks later, I found myself at another party, nursing a beer in a quiet corner. My thoughts were interrupted when someone dropped into the seat next to me, pulling me out of my solitude. I turned my head, and to my disbelief, there she was, the woman who had starred in more than a few of my dreams. "So, what's the deal? Are you gay or bi?" she asked, her tone casual but direct. No judgment here, but let's be real. I haven't met a straight guy who hasn't tried to hit on me since I was 15. And you're not wearing a wedding ring, so spill it. What's your story? I felt my face flush hotter than it ever had before. My words stumbled over themselves like a nervous teenager. Meanwhile, her shirt rose and fell with her every breath, teasingly accentuating her beauty. Up close, she was just as stunning as she'd been from across the room, and my body was already betraying me. My so-called genius, IQ, completely useless in that moment. "Oh, I see how it is," she said, her eyes flicking downward with a smirk. No, I finally managed to choke out. Neither. I just figured someone like you wouldn't have time for a guy like me, not with all the handsome guys practically lining up. She tilted her head, amused. "Well, honey, sometimes we like a little mystery in our men. You should try it." We ended up leaving the party together, and by the time we graduated, we were married. I wasn't naive. I knew Tracy had her share of experience before we met, but I was confident in one thing. I knew how to please her in ways that went beyond the basics. That first night together, I turned her into a trembling mess, and I've been able to do it ever since, at least when she let me. Which brings me to tonight. It had been 2 weeks since Tracy and I last made love, the longest dry spell in our marriage outside of her pregnancies. She'd always had some excuse, too tired, not in the mood. Honestly, I stopped keeping track. That night, while she stood at the sink rinsing a pot, I decided I'd had enough. I approached her from behind, wrapping my arms around her in an affectionate gesture before leading her to the bedroom to spend some quiet, intimate time together. For a change, she was more vocal than I'd ever heard her in nearly 3 decades of marriage. Her usual incoherent cries were replaced with actual words, shouted ones. "Hell yes! Hell yes!" she screamed. And I'll admit I was enjoying myself, right up until she casually threw out her critique of my skills. That's when everything got a little too real. 2 weeks after the break room incident, Tracy started her campaign to charm Carl Walters in earnest. A work-related deal gave her the perfect pretext to invite him to dinner. On the surface, it seemed no different from her usual lunches with other agents. She was, after all, the top producer and senior agent. But this time, she made sure Rhonda knew about it. Tracy was professional enough to handle the business side first. After all, a paycheck is a paycheck. But once that was out of the way, she flipped the switch, transforming into Carl's newest confidant. Over a bottle of wine, she mined every detail about him. His football days, his personal life. He mentioned he had a girlfriend, but they weren't exclusive. Tracy leaned into the conversation, literally, ensuring Carl couldn't miss the way her blazer fell open to reveal her fitted blouse, the top few buttons left undone. A quick glance at his lap told her she'd achieved her goal. Men are so predictable, she thought. He's mine. He just doesn't know it yet. 5 more pounds, and I'll give him his reward. The private investigator I hired turned out to be worth every penny of the Hawaii vacation I'd sacrificed to pay him. What he uncovered made me reconsider taking any kind of trip with Tracy again. Turns out, she wasn't just fooling around with Carl Walters, but also a guy named Fred Lazarus, and even worse, her gym trainer. When the investigator handed me his report, he looked so uncomfortable I wondered if he was considering making a move on her himself. While I'm no stereotypical nerd, I've always kept a diverse group of friends, one of whom is Marty Bolins, a sharp and relentless attorney. Marty's the kind of guy who might not win a fight with his fists, but could crush someone's spirit in court. When I told him what Tracy had been up to, we both agreed. She wasn't getting away with this. Our state didn't allow no-fault divorces, and we weren't going to let her hide behind irreconcilable differences. As for Fred Lazarus, he was just supposed to be a one-night revenge fling, a lesson for Rhonda, who'd called her a cheese-A. But Fred turned out to be more than a one-time thing. His skills, combined with his physique, were enough to convince Tracy to keep him around. Darren, the gym trainer, had been an accident, one suggestive touch during a workout session, and Tracy couldn't resist. 15 minutes later, they were tangled in his tiny apartment, tearing off their clothes like teenagers on prom night. Tracy arrived home about half an hour later than usual, still wearing her workout clothes. I walked in shortly after, catching her as she rushed upstairs to shower before heading back down to start dinner. She acted as though everything was perfectly normal, but I knew better. Tracy seemed invincible in her own mind, towering with the confidence of someone who thought they couldn't be caught. Despite the anger simmering inside me, I held myself together. Later that evening, after dinner, Tracy was tidying up in the kitchen while I relaxed in the living room, watching TV. The doorbell rang. Tracy called out, asking me to answer it, but I'd already seen through the window who it was. "Why don't you get it?" I replied casually. She shrugged, laughed, and opened the door. Moments later, she walked into the living room holding a manila envelope, her expression shifting from bemusement to shock. "What the hell is this?" she hissed, staring at the opened envelope. "How could you do this? What about our family?" "You're only mad because I beat you to it," I replied flatly. "If I'd given you more time, you would have served me first. Don't pretend this is about love. It hasn't been for a long time. I know about the others, or at least some of them." My throat tightened as I forced the words out. Tracy's face flushed deep red, shifting from shock to fury. "You think you know something?" she snapped. "Then say it. I'm listening." "Carl Walters, Fred Lazarus," I said, letting the names hang in the air. Then I pulled a small piece of paper from my pocket. "And Darren Trimble. Those are just the ones I know about." The color drained from her face. her confidence visibly crumbling. She sank onto the sofa across from me, staring at me like I'd just knocked the wind out of her. Clearly, she hadn't expected me to know as much as I did. "Well, maybe if you'd been more of a man, we wouldn't be having this conversation," she spat, attempting to regain her footing. I wasn't surprised by the attack. Sleeping with 3 different men had clearly given her a false sense of superiority. "Oh, so now it's my fault?" I replied, my voice weary. Apparently, 29 years of marriage doesn't earn loyalty anymore. Funny, because none of those guys were even born when we got married. Her eyes widened, realizing just how much I'd uncovered. She seemed ready to argue further, but stopped herself. "I'll let you stay in the house until it sells," I said, standing up. "You can explain everything to the kids and your parents. I'll grab the rest of my things later." I walked to the hallway closet and pulled out 2 suitcases I'd packed earlier. Tracy's face contorted in disbelief. "I'll have my lawyer handle the details. You should find one too." "This is over, Tracy." I didn't look back as I left, but I heard something crash against the wall behind me. Tracy hadn't been ready for divorce, though I knew she was planning it. She'd likely been working on a way to make me look like the villain. She realized our friends would side with me. They always liked me. And I knew she planned to manipulate the kids by attacking my masculinity, hoping they'd sympathize with her desire for excitement. Still, she hadn't expected me to take charge. She wondered if someone had seen her with one of her lovers and tipped me off, not realizing her behavior had been her own undoing. When she finally served me with divorce papers, she seemed startled by how well I was holding up. Truthfully, I felt lighter than I had in years. I was proud of myself as I left the house with my 2 suitcases. Tracy had no idea what hit her. I checked into a nearby motel, ready to start over. The one thing Tracy fought for tooth and nail was changing the reason for the divorce. She wanted me to file under irreconcilable differences instead of infidelity. It wasn't about money. She still got half of everything. But I suspected she wanted to twist the narrative to make me look like the bad guy. "There's no need for everyone to know our personal business," she shouted over the phone one night. "Change it to irreconcilable differences, and I'll sign immediately." "Nice try," I replied. "But your logic is as clear as glass. I'm not giving you the chance to rewrite the story. If anyone looks at the court records, they'll see the truth. You decided to cheat while we were still married. Now, you get to live with the consequences. You could have respected me enough to leave first. Instead, you made your bed." Her retaliation came through rumors. She spread lies about me being terrible in bed, hoping I'd cave. It stung, but what hurt most was when our youngest daughter, Allison, confronted me. "You're stalking Mom because you can't handle your ego being bruised," she accused. "If that's what she told you, then let's set the record straight," I said, my voice cold. "Your mother's not having an affair with just one man. She's juggling 3. That's right, 3 men, all around your age. She's supposed to be my partner, but instead she turned into someone I barely recognize." Allison's face fell as she stammered in disbelief, tears filling her eyes. I'd never spoken so harshly to her before, and the look on her face nearly broke me. She left my apartment in shock, and it took all my strength not to go after her and offer a comforting hug. About 20 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Tracy's mother, Barb, who hadn't spoken to me since the divorce proceedings began. We used to be close, but that was clearly no longer the case. "How could you say something so cruel to Allison?" she yelled as soon as I answered. "You idiot! That girl adored you, and now she's here on my couch crying her eyes out. What were you thinking saying those horrible things about Tracy?" "Barb, hold on," I said, keeping my tone calm. "You've only heard Tracy's version of the story, not mine. She's been seeing 3 different men behind my back. If you don't believe me, ask her yourself." "I have proof," Barb gasped, her sharp intake of breath loud enough to be heard clearly over the line. "What kind of proof? Mark, do you have photos, videos?" "Yes," I replied quietly. I wasn't planning to go nuclear, but apparently Tracy has decided to play dirty. "Dear God, no, that's not necessary, Mark. I'll talk to her. 3 men? I can't believe it. I'm so sorry." Her voice cracked and she hung up before I could say more. I sighed as I put down the phone. Barb had been like a second mother to me after my own mom passed away years ago. I could talk to her about anything, and she always listened. But now, I'd shattered her perception of her daughter, and it felt like I'd crushed her spirit in the process. The divorce, finalized a year later, was granted on the grounds of infidelity. During that time, Tracy continued her liaisons with her boys, though I stopped caring enough to keep track. My focus had shifted to moving on. A month after filing for divorce, I started noticing something strange. Women from different departments at the university began stopping by my office, checking on me. 2 women from the science department, whom I barely knew, came to my small basement office in the math building on separate occasions to offer support. Both left their numbers in case I needed to talk. They were both attractive, one divorced in her 50s, the other a widow in her 40s. I appreciated their concern but couldn't understand why I was suddenly on their radar. Encounters like these became frequent. Women I'd barely interacted with over the years were now smiling, chatting, and going out of their way to be there for me. One afternoon, as I was leaving my office, Colleen, the department's administrative secretary, caught my eye and gave me a dazzling smile. Colleen was 35, recently divorced, with striking green eyes, glossy black hair, and a figure that turned heads. "Okay, Colleen," I said, stopping in my tracks. "What's going on? Did I inherit a fortune I don't know about?" She laughed, a mischievous sparkle in her eye. "You really don't get it, do you?" "Apparently not," I said, genuinely confused. She stepped closer, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "It's your weight loss, Mark. You've shed 120 pounds, and by that I mean your wife. You were always the sweet, smart guy, but as long as you were married, you were off limits. Now that your ring is gone, well, it's open season." I stared at her, trying to process what she'd just said. She laughed at my expression. "Seriously, Mark, you're a rare find. Handsome, smart, kind, and single. Trust me, word got around fast. And just so you know," she added with a wink, "I'm submitting my application too." I'll add it to the queue," I stammered, flustered. She chuckled as she walked away. Meanwhile, Tracy had underestimated how quickly word of her actions would spread. She thought she could control the narrative, but within weeks, friends and family were calling her out. A month after I filed for divorce, Tracy's oldest friend, Marge Rochambeau, called her. "Are you out of your mind? How could you let the best guy in the world walk away from you?" Marge demanded. Tracy froze. How does she already know? She wondered. Marge lived 2 hours away in their hometown, and Tracy had assumed she had more time to spin the story before word reached everyone she knew. "It's complicated," Tracy began, trying to sound composed. "Complicated?" Marge scoffed. "Your mom spilled everything. She broke down crying in the middle of Walmart last week and told my mom the whole story. What were you thinking, Tracy? Cheating on a man who adored you?" Tracy's heart sank. She thought her family would stay quiet, but clearly that wasn't the case. Marge continued her rant. "You cheated on a man who was loyal, loving, and kind because you thought you deserved better. Newsflash, Tracy, you're not exactly the woman you were at 30. And guess what? You're about to hit middle age, too. Did you ever stop to think about that?" Tracy stammered, trying to come up with a response, but Marge cut her off. "I've always known you could be selfish, but I never thought you'd do this to Mark." The day my divorce was finalized, I found myself in my apartment, picking at a small salad and washing it down with several glasses of Buffalo Trace bourbon. Meanwhile, Tracy celebrated her newfound freedom with Carl, whisking him off to an upscale dinner before heading back to his place. It wasn't their first rendezvous, but something felt off for her that night. Despite her best efforts, she couldn't rekindle the same spark. Frustrated but unwilling to admit it to herself, or to him, she made her excuses and left. As she drove home, she reflected bitterly that her first night as a divorced woman had fallen spectacularly flat. 2 weeks later, I had dinner with Judy Scalise, a longtime mutual friend of Tracy's and mine. Judy was a safe choice for a first post-divorce date, someone who understood the history but wouldn't complicate things. I wanted to avoid misunderstandings. As we sat across from each other, I decided to let my guard down a bit. "You know," I said with a wry smile, "I thought I had women all figured out. 30 years of marriage, and I really believed I'd cracked the code. But here I am, completely clueless. What should I do next?" Judy, an artist with an unconventional charm, gave me a thoughtful look. She was a few years younger than me, yoga-toned, with luminous blue eyes and rich, dark hair. She'd always been striking, but I'd never let my thoughts drift in her direction, until now. "Mark," she said with a soft smile, "I'm glad you called. Honestly, I didn't expect to be first on your list, but I'm honored. That said, let's not waste tonight rehashing you and Tracy. We can save that for coffee some other time. For now, let's just enjoy ourselves as 2 adults moving forward." "You're right," I agreed. "You can't move forward while looking backward." Encouraged, I stood up, leaned toward her, and kissed her. To my surprise, Judy rose to meet me, responding with a kiss so passionate it left me breathless. Before that night, I'd never considered Judy in a romantic or physical way. Sure, I knew she was beautiful and had a body that turned heads, but I'd never looked at her through that lens. My loyalty to Tracy had been absolute. But now, sitting across from Judy, I couldn't help but wonder what it would be like to hold her in my arms. My nervousness must have been obvious. I felt my face flush, but I pushed through, keeping the conversation light as we shared cheesecake and coffee. At the end of the meal, Judy tilted her head, her eyes twinkling. "You know," she said, her voice low, "I think we should head back to my place for a proper nightcap. Something tells me it's been a while for you, and I'd like to be the first woman after the Queen." Her forwardness both thrilled and terrified me. It had been a long time since I'd been with anyone, and I doubted my stamina. Would I measure up? And what if things went south? Judy knew both Tracy and me. The last thing I needed was for my insecurities to become gossip. When we arrived at her house, Judy disappeared briefly to change into something more comfortable, leaving me in the kitchen with a cup of coffee. When she returned, she was wearing a short terry cloth robe that barely reached mid-thigh. She ditched her bra, and the way the fabric clung to her left nothing to the imagination. My thoughts raced as we sat on the couch, chatting and sipping coffee. I tried my best to focus on her words, and not the way her robe shifted when she moved. "Mark," she said softly, breaking through my daze. "You with me?" I blinked, embarrassed. Judy took my coffee cup, set it on the table, and gently led me to her bedroom. Before I fully registered what was happening, she started undressing me with deliberate, patient hands. "Hold on," I whispered nervously. "It's been a while, and I'm not sure I can, pace myself." "Relax," she said with a smile. "We have all night." "Well, don't be too patient," I teased, slipping the robe from her shoulders. What followed was far better than I dared to hope. Judy's warmth and understanding calmed my nerves, and everything fell into place. As we lay side by side afterward, catching our breath, she turned to me with a teasing grin. "Did you have to be that irresistible?" she asked. "Of course," I replied, smirking. "It's part of the package." Judy laughed and nestled against me, turning her back so I could hold her. I wrapped my arms around her, and for the first time in months, I felt truly at peace. We fell asleep like that, tangled together, and I slept deeper than I had in years. I woke the next morning to find Judy's body pressed against mine. She turned her head, smiling at me. "Good morning, handsome," she said, her voice soft but playful. "Good morning," I murmured. "You're incredible, you know that?" She kissed me lightly and replied, "I could say the same about you." About a month after our divorce was finalized, Tracy invited Judy to lunch. Though they had been friends for years, Judy knew this wasn't just a friendly catch-up. Tracy had an agenda, and Judy suspected it involved prying into her recent time with me. For the first 10 minutes, they exchanged polite small talk, but Tracy wasted no time in steering the conversation toward her target. "So, lots of dates lately, Judy? That's a surprise," Tracy said, her tone sweet but sharp. She sipped her margarita, her smile feline as she waited for a reaction. Judy felt her cheeks flush. She had expected Tracy to bring me up, but wasn't prepared for the underlying hostility. Memories of the nights we'd spent together flickered through her mind, and she fought to keep her expression neutral. "Well, Mark is exceptional," Judy admitted, her voice tinged with awe. "You know that better than anyone." For a brief moment, Tracy's confidence faltered. She had assumed my talents wouldn't carry over to someone else, that our chemistry had been unique. Judy's tone made it clear that wasn't the case. "How could you let him go?" Judy continued, her words spilling out before she could stop herself. "Smart, sweet, handsome, and honestly a wizard in the bedroom. Are you crazy?" Tracy's smile froze, then faded entirely. She quickly shifted the subject, steering the conversation into safer territory. Judy played along, knowing she had already said more than enough. Meanwhile, across town, Molly Hamilton lay curled against my side, her head resting on my chest. Her breathing was steady and soft, a stark contrast to the wild, unrestrained passion we had just shared. It had been raw and intense, leaving me exhausted but deeply satisfied. I felt both battered and triumphant, as though I'd just conquered a mountain. If I live to be 100, I thought, I'll never figure women out. Tracy had told me I wasn't enough for her sexually, yet here I was, 3 months post-divorce, making a 32-year-old scream loud enough to wake the neighbors. None of it made sense, but I wasn't complaining. I had met Molly at the gym. She wasn't there to flaunt herself or seek attention. Her focus was on the machines, sweat pouring as she pushed herself hard. Something about her determination caught my eye, and I waited until she finished her workout before approaching her. I wasn't in the habit of asking women out since my divorce, despite the signals I'd received from a few. But Molly was different. She had an effortless magnetism that drew me in. I introduced myself and asked if she'd like to come over one evening for coffee and dessert. She hesitated briefly, her green eyes studying me before agreeing. She entered her name and number into my phone and smiled, her beauty disarming. As she walked away, I called her number. She turned at the sound, eyebrows raised. "Now feels like the right time to ask. How about Thursday evening?" I said, grinning. Her face broke into a radiant smile. "Thursday it is. Let's meet at Laszlo's at 7. For the rest of my workout, I felt invincible. That Thursday, I arrived at Laszlo's 10 minutes early, found a quiet table in the back, and ordered cheesecake. Molly walked in moments later, her long blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail, wearing snug jean shorts and a cropped t-shirt that highlighted her toned figure. She wasn't wearing a bra, and the way her chest moved as she approached was hard to ignore. She caught me looking, raised an eyebrow, and smiled knowingly. Embarrassed, I smiled back. We spent 2 hours talking over coffee and dessert. Molly was sharp, funny, and completely captivating. I wasn't sure if she was as interested in me as I was in her, but she agreed to a second date. That Saturday, we visited an antique car museum before heading to dinner. The evening ended at my apartment, where one thing led to another. Let's just say I wasn't out of practice after all. While I was drifting off to sleep next to Molly that night, Tracy was across town, with a much younger man she had met earlier in the evening. Their encounter was hurried and mechanical, leaving her unsatisfied. As she drove home, she couldn't help but wonder if her choice of younger partners was part of the problem. Carl had broken things off a month earlier, explaining that he wanted a relationship leading to marriage and children, neither of which Tracy could offer. Though he'd been kind about it, the breakup had stung. As she pulled into her driveway, Tracy considered that perhaps it was time to look for someone closer to her age. Younger men were fun, but the lack of meaningful conversation was wearing thin. Being with Molly made me reflect on my time with Tracy. From my limited experience before our marriage, I had always suspected Tracy wasn't particularly skilled in bed. She didn't need to be. Her looks had always been enough to captivate men. Over the years, I made peace with it because I loved her, convincing myself that what we had was the best it could be. But now, with Judy, Katie, and Molly, I realized just how wrong I had been. True closeness was a connection far deeper than I had ever experienced with Tracy. As I lay in bed that night, with Molly's warmth beside me, one thought lingered. Tracy had fooled me again. Not with lies, but with the belief that what we had was as good as it could get. She couldn't have been more wrong. 2 weeks after the wedding invitations went out, my phone buzzed with an unexpected call from Tracy. I hadn't spoken to her in months, and during my visits with our daughters, her name rarely came up. I'd made it clear that while I wanted them to respect and love their mother, my relationship with her was over. They'd honored that boundary. "Mark," Tracy began without preamble, "April wants to know if we can be civil long enough to survive her wedding. Robert finally popped the question, and she wants us both there, but only if we can behave ourselves." "I haven't heard from April yet," I replied, keeping my tone even. "But you can assure her I'll be a perfect gentleman, especially if you can remember you were once the woman I loved. I'll tell her the same when she calls me with the good news." The next day, April called to share her excitement. I congratulated her and repeated what I'd told Tracy, adding that I was happy to help cover the costs and hoped she'd enjoy planning the event with her mother. On the day of the wedding, walking April down the aisle was an experience that caught me completely off guard. My little girl, who once sang silly songs and carried her favorite doll everywhere, had grown into a radiant, confident woman. Those 30 steps felt both fleeting and endless as a flood of memories played in my mind. By the time I handed her to Robert at the altar, my composure broke, and tears rolled down my cheeks. As I returned to my seat, Tracy leaned over, her own eyes wet, and kissed me gently on the cheek. Later, during the father-daughter dance, we swayed to a soft waltz. The moment felt surreal, but it passed too quickly. Afterward, the music shifted to a livelier beat, and the younger crowd flooded the dance floor. I retreated to the bar for a scotch, letting the evening's emotions settle. I wasn't there long before I saw Tracy slow dancing with a man easily 30 years her junior. I approached and politely asked the young man if I could cut in. Tracy lit up with a grin and extended her hand toward me, leaving the boy no choice but to step aside. "You don't trust me with these kids, do you?" she teased as we began to dance. "Half the world thinks I'm a strumpet thanks to you. That poor guy probably thinks I'm ready to take him home." "If that's what you're looking for, I can bring him back," I replied dryly. "But I thought you might prefer dancing with someone who doesn't think Beyoncé is the height of musical genius." "Touché," she said with a smirk. "Well, unless you're planning to stab me right here on the dance floor, I think we've done pretty well this weekend." I nodded. "We have. It's probably the most mature we've been around each other in years." "True," she admitted with a soft laugh. "At least we waited until the kids moved out before we fell apart." We danced through a couple of songs before her previous partner returned, nervously asking if he could cut back in. To Tracy's surprise, I stepped aside without hesitation. Back at the table, my youngest daughter, Ellie, joined me. Watching her mother on the dance floor, she said in a half-joking tone, "Do you think I'll have to worry about men stalking her in the nursing home?" I glanced at Ellie, catching the flicker of seriousness behind her humor. She continued without waiting for a response. "What about you, Dad? Mom says you've been dating, but I get the sense no one's come close to replacing her." "I'm fine, sweetheart," I replied. "Better than fine, actually. Your mom doesn't know as much about my life as she thinks she does. I'm not looking to replace her. I'm just living my life." Just then, Wendy Adams approached our table. Wendy and her late husband, Earl, had been family friends for years. Earl and I were especially close before he passed away. Wendy still kept in touch with Tracy, but we hadn't seen each other much since Earl's end of life. Tonight, she looked radiant in a figure-hugging dress that hinted she hadn't let the years slow her down. "Care to join us?" I asked. Wendy smiled warmly, but shook her head. "Actually, I was hoping to steal you for a dance." Ellie raised an eyebrow, but quickly grinned. "Go ahead, Dad. Shake a leg." As Wendy and I made our way to the dance floor, Ellie leaned in and whispered, "Coincidences like this only happen in the movies, Dad." We danced through a couple of songs before retreating to the bar area, where we found a quiet corner to sit and talk. As we chatted, Wendy suddenly took my hand, her expression serious. "Mark," she said, locking eyes with me, "are you still in love with her? Because if you are, I won't make a fool of myself by asking you to dinner." Her question caught me off guard. I'd always thought of Wendy as Tracy's friend, and though I admired her, I'd never considered pursuing her. But now, sitting here with her, I realized how much I enjoyed her company. "I'll always love her in some way," I admitted, "but I'm not in love with her anymore. That part of my life is over." Wendy smiled softly. "Good, because I'm not a young girl anymore, Mark. I've been alone for 8 years, and there aren't many men I'm interested in. If I see someone I care about, I'm not going to hold back. Tracy let you go. It's been 3 years since your divorce, and you're not hers anymore. So, if you're willing, I'd like to see where this goes." Wendy blushed as she spoke her last words, her cheeks coloring in a way that made her look younger. I couldn't help but feel a sudden, irresistible urge to be the one to help her get back on the horse, as she'd put it. I handed her my phone, and she entered her number with a quick, shy smile. Just as she was handing it back to me, April and Robert emerged from the reception hall, searching for me. April recognized Wendy immediately, and they exchanged pleasantries. After a brief chat, Wendy gracefully excused herself. "You better get back in there and play Father of the Bride," she teased before walking away. As she left, I reached out, took her hands in mine, and leaned in to plant a light kiss on her lips. "To be continued," I said softly, watching her blush deepen as she nodded and smiled. The rest of the evening unfolded with the usual wedding traditions, cutting the cake, toasts, and dancing. But Tracy, to my surprise, barely left my side for the remainder of the night. I couldn't help but wonder if April had mentioned my conversation with Wendy. Tracy's behavior felt tinged with jealousy, a sentiment I hadn't seen from her in years. I'll admit it was flattering, even after everything that had passed between us. Later, as the evening wound down, April shared an anecdote with her mother. "We interrupted Dad and Wendy Adams earlier," she said. "They looked pretty cozy, and I'm pretty sure they kissed before she left." Allison chimed in with a mischievous grin, adding that Wendy had looked like a smitten teenager while dancing with me. Judging by Tracy's expression, she didn't share Allison's enthusiasm. By the end of the night, Tracy and I found ourselves alone in the hotel lobby. She had arrived by taxi, so I offered her a ride home. She accepted on one condition, that we stop for a drink at the hotel bar. Considering how well we'd gotten along that evening, a rarity in recent years, I agreed. We found a small table near the bar, and I ordered for both of us. "Bourbon on the rocks for the lady, and I'll have a stolly," I told the waitress. Tracy smiled faintly. "It's nice that you still remember. You're still the only woman I've ever known who drinks whiskey properly," I replied with a smirk. Tracy hesitated, then blurted out, "Are you going to date Wendy Adams?" She flushed deeply, covering her cheek with one hand. "I didn't mean it like that," she stammered. "It just slipped out, but are you? You've dated so many beautiful women since the divorce. It's like you didn't even miss me. Was all this part of some grand plan to sow your wild oats?" I lowered my glass, holding her gaze for a long moment before answering. "That's an interesting theory, Tracy," I said evenly. "But I seem to remember someone else doing the oat sowing while we were still married. To this day, you've never explained why you treated me that way. Why you disrespected the man who was ready to grow old with you." Tracy's expression shifted, a mix of regret and pain crossing her face. She sighed deeply. "I made a mistake, Mark, a terrible, stupid mistake." I stayed silent, letting her continue. "I was terrified of getting older. I started chasing a thrill, trying to prove to myself that I could still turn heads, still make men want me. The attention from younger guys felt like proof that I was still desirable. But it wasn't about the sex. It was about the excitement of being wanted by someone new, someone younger. And I let myself believe that what I had with them was better than what we had. I was too blind to see that I was wrong." Her voice wavered. "After you left, the thrill disappeared. It turns out there's nothing exciting about meaningless encounters. Sure, it felt good for my ego to know that younger guys still found me attractive. But there was no depth, no connection. And damn it, Mark, I'd do anything for the kind of closeness we used to have." I sighed, leaning back in my chair. "Have you considered dating someone your own age? Someone who's in the same stage of life, who understands what it means to build something real, even if he can't keep up with a 25-year-old in every way?" Tracy met my eyes, her voice quiet but resolute. "That's what I'm trying to do now, Mark. I'm done chasing after boys who don't know what they want." She paused, her eyes filling with tears. "We had 30 good years together. I know I don't deserve it, but can you forgive me? Can we try again?" A single tear rolled down her cheek as she waited for my response. Before everything fell apart, I would have held Tracy in my arms and tried to make the world a better place for her. Even now, after all that had happened, part of me still felt that pull. But this wasn't 3 years ago. Back then, her apology might have meant something. Now it felt more like a desperate attempt to rewrite history. I shook my head slowly. "Tracy, let's be honest. We had about 29 good years together, not 30. This last year doesn't count as anything but chaos, and this isn't a fairy tale. In the real world, we wouldn't make it. Come on, let me take you home." After the wedding, I waited a week before calling Wendy Adams. We'd had an electric connection at the reception, but I didn't want to rush things. When I finally called, we planned a date at a lovely seafood restaurant in a nearby town. Wendy wore a sleek, form-fitting dress that caught every man's eye, but unlike Tracy, she seemed oblivious to the attention. Her focus was entirely on me, and I couldn't help but be captivated. Dinner was fantastic, great food, paired with effortless conversation. Afterward, we went back to her house for dessert and a drink. She poured us both a glass of cognac, and as we finished our drinks, she stood, took my hand, and led me upstairs. The room she brought me to wasn't the master bedroom. It was clear she couldn't bring herself to share that space, the one she had shared with Earl, with anyone else. I respected her unspoken decision. Wendy didn't need to ask me to be gentle. I knew Earl had been her great love, and she likely hadn't been with anyone since his passing. I started slow, kissing her lips softly as I helped her undress. She returned the favor, her hands trembling slightly as she helped me out of my clothes. Her body was beautiful, natural, full, and still defying gravity. Tenderness gave way to passion, and soon I saw a fiery side of Wendy that I hadn't expected. Afterward, as we lay entangled in each other's arms, her breathing slowed into the steady rhythm of sleep. I watched her for a long moment, struck by how angelic she looked. It had been years since I felt this kind of connection with someone. Not just physical, but emotional. I eventually drifted into the best night's sleep I'd had in years. The next morning felt different from any other I'd experienced since my divorce. It reminded me of lazy Sundays from my married days, when Tracy would be downstairs making breakfast and the girls would run around playing. But this wasn't Tracy, and there were no children, just Wendy in the kitchen, frying bacon and brewing coffee. I pulled on some trousers and went downstairs. Wendy greeted me wearing nothing but my shirt, the sleeves rolled up and the buttons haphazardly done. She looked stunning. "Hope you don't mind," she said with a smile. "Your shirt smelled like you, and I wasn't ready to give that up just yet." "Well," I replied, grinning, "what's a man got to do to get some breakfast around here?" She stepped closer, and I pulled her into a tight hug. She smelled of coffee, bacon, and the lingering scent of last night's closeness. It was perfect. We ate and talked, making plans for the day. It was a Saturday, and the possibilities felt endless. For the first time in years, there was no me or you. It was all about what we would do. Then an idea hit me like lightning. "This might sound crazy," I said, setting down my coffee, "but how about we get married today?" Wendy blinked, then smiled. "You always did have a sharp mind," she said with a grin. "I'll do whatever you think is best." The local justice of the peace had Saturday hours, so I called to see if he was available at 4 p.m. He was. That gave us just over 7 hours to prepare. I asked Wendy's 28-year-old son, Aaron, to be my best man. Once I explained that the bride was his mother, he agreed enthusiastically, saying he'd bring his wife and daughter along. Wendy called her mother to ask if she'd be her maid of honor. The phone was on speaker, and when her mom heard the news, she burst into tears of joy, immediately agreeing. I called my daughters, April and Allison, inviting them along with April's husband, Robert. "I think you'll like what's happening today," I teased. Wendy, smiling mischievously, asked, "Should I invite Tracy?" I paused. "Only if you really want to," I said carefully. "But I'd rather not. She's been through a lot, and I don't want this to feel like a victory lap." We secured a small banquet room at a friend's restaurant for a reception. As the hours ticked by, we each invited a handful of friends and family to join us for what was shaping up to be a perfect, spontaneous celebration. Before heading to a jewelry store to pick out wedding rings, Wendy almost literally bumped into Tracy on the sidewalk outside her favorite boutique. Tracy, juggling several shopping bags, greeted Wendy warmly. Though their friendship had faded over the years, they'd known each other for more than 25 years, and the conversation started off pleasant enough. Then Tracy noticed the 2 rings on Wendy's left hand. "Oh my God, Wendy, those rings are stunning!" Tracy exclaimed. Wendy's face turned a deep shade of red, and it was as if a light bulb suddenly went off in Tracy's mind. "Wait, are you married to Mark?" Tracy asked, her voice faltering as she swayed slightly, her face pale. Wendy quickly grabbed her shoulders to steady her. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know," Tracy said, her words rushed and uneven. "It all happened so fast," Wendy admitted, still blushing. "We didn't make a big announcement." "That doesn't sound like the Mark I remember," Tracy said, managing a faint smile. Wendy hesitated, then said softly, "Have you ever just known something was right, like you couldn't let it slip away? That's how it felt." Realizing her words could sting, Wendy quickly backtracked. "I didn't mean—" "It's okay," Tracy interrupted with a forced smile. "I get it, Wendy. Trust me. I've made mistakes. Just promise me one thing. Don't let him go." Later, sitting in her therapist's office, Tracy sighed dramatically. "There must be good men out there, right? I mean, they were everywhere when I decided to leave Mark. And now, gone. It's like they vanished." Dr. Ellen McForrest, her longtime therapist, didn't mince words. "You're intelligent, Tracy. You must have known there are very few good, available men at your age. But instead of focusing on those rare gems, you chased a fantasy. Young men who were never going to stick around. Did you really think great Zex could replace a meaningful connection? You can't just have fun forever. Eventually, you'd have to build a life with someone." Tracy groaned. "God, Doc, sometimes life really sucks." Fast forward 10 years. I'm standing on the back porch of the cozy 2-bedroom house Wendy and I bought shortly after our whirlwind wedding. We didn't want to live in the shadow of old memories, so we found a home that was entirely ours. It's perfect for us. Small, but with plenty of space for family gatherings. These days, we're proud grandparents 6 times over. I'm grilling steaks when Wendy steps outside, carrying 2 glasses of whiskey on the rocks. She hands me one with a warm smile, and I lean in to kiss her lightly on the lips. At 63, Wendy looks incredible. Her dedication to staying active and healthy paying off. Her light brown hair is streaked with gray, but she still turns heads when she gets dressed up for our casual date nights. We're not kids anymore, but we're far from slowing down. Between laughing with our grandchildren and our twice-weekly escapades in the bedroom, sometimes even in the shower, it's safe to say we're enjoying life. Modern medicine truly is a miracle. Looking back, I once thought I'd spend my life with Tracy. I loved her deeply. But now, I can't imagine growing old with anyone but Wendy. In a strange way, I'm grateful for the heartbreak Tracy caused. It led me to the life I have now. I see Tracy occasionally. We exchange pleasantries, mostly about the grandchildren, but the sadness in her eyes is always there. She doesn't look well. The vibrancy she once carried is gone, replaced by a shadow of regret. She's constantly apologizing, though she never says exactly what for. At 65, Tracy's once admired figure has changed. Though she still dresses well, she's aware that she no longer catches men's eyes as she walks through the mall. Her cheesecake curves have returned, but they no longer turn heads. One day, as she's leaving the mall, she spots me walking toward her. Straightening up, she manages a smile. "Hello, Tracy," I say warmly, leaning in to kiss her cheek. "You're looking well." She blushes faintly, and we exchange small talk for a few minutes. The conversation drifts to the grandkids, our shared joy, and then I glance at my watch. "Well, I should get going," I say. "Mark," she says softly, hesitating, I'm really sorry." I meet her gaze, pausing for a moment before giving her a kind smile. "Take care, Tracy," I say simply. And with that, I turn and walk away, leaving her behind, not just on the sidewalk, but in every sense. Moving forward, as I always have. Years later, as I sit on the porch of the house Wendy and I share, the twilight casts a golden hue over the garden we planted together. The days feel fuller now, brimming with laughter, quiet moments, and a sense of belonging I once thought I'd lost forever. I watch Wendy tending to her roses, her movements graceful and sure, as if every petal she touches blossoms a little brighter for her care. The past feels distant, like a novel I once read and set aside, the pages now yellowed with age. Tracy occasionally crosses my mind, not with bitterness, but with a quiet acceptance. She was a chapter, a significant one, but not the ending. Life, as it turns out, is far better when shared with someone who understands you, flaws and all. Tonight, Wendy brings out 2 glasses of wine, a soft smile playing on her lips. We toast to nothing in particular, simply reveling in the luxury of time spent together. The years have left their marks on us, but they've also deepened our connection, polishing what we have into something rare and enduring. As the sun dips below the horizon, the sky painted in hues of amber and violet, I realize something. Happiness isn't about finding perfection. It's about building something beautiful from imperfections, together. Wendy places her hand over mine, and I know without a doubt I'm exactly where I'm meant to be. The past has its place, but this is mine now, and it's everything I could ever hope for.